Welcome back.
Dr. Love, if you please.
Oh, man.
It's good to
So,
be here, man. Thank you.
yeah. So, listeners, it's been a bit since we've had Pat on the show. He has now become Dr. Pat, which we are incredibly excited about.
Yeah.
What's on the agenda today? We don't know. Mostly, we wanted to catch up. I wanted to talk over the dissertation and all the other things which are going on with both of us. I got most of the way through, which is good.
Dude,
So,
impressive, man. I just
most of
sent
the
that to
way.
you. That's a meaty document. So
Well, it's funny as I was going, I'm like, "I know what he's about to say. Oh,
yeah.
I know what's coming up," because I've but most of the parts and pieces of it there's a few things I hadn't seen before, but most of it was kinda stuff that you'd been thinking about through other papers.
Yeah. So for people who
Yeah.
aren't familiar, as you are, is my dissertation was on the doctrine of divine simplicity. The
Yes.
strong form of divine
Mhm.
simplicity, which will who wants that weak stuff, right?
Yep, yes.
And what I'm doing is I'm not only defending that doctrine, but I'm looking at how it resolves a host of issues in lots of different areas in metaphysics and constituent ontology, metaethics, and then towards the end I even tease some stuff with for epistemology and philosophical anthropology, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And you said, hey, some of this stuff looks familiar. And that's true because as I was working on my dissertation, I was chunking parts of it out for publication, in various journals.
Mhm.
And I had some decent success there. So in modified form, you know, I don't know, 60, 70% of my dissertation is out there in a in
Mhm.
in a journal or other. Whether it's the cosmological argument portion. The meta ethics section is interesting because even though I only have one section related to meta ethics in the dissertation, I've had two kind of extended projects of that that are now published, and I have another one that's under peer review. It's on the second round of revise and resubmit, so it's been kind of a brutal back and forth with this one reviewer. So that's been interesting because like the meta ethics was, I'm more of a metaphysics guy, and I didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
expect to kind
Uh-huh.
of veer as much into meta ethics. But the past couple months, I've been spending actually considerably more time there. So all to say, yes, people who've been following my kind of published work, a lot of what's in my dissertation will not surprise you. It'll maybe go deeper or wider in some ways, but it really is all
Mhm.
kind of continuous with the stuff I've already been doing. Yeah.
That's the part that I hadn't seen before, and that's the part kinda towards the end of the dissertation, so I skipped ahead because 'cause I'm just like, "What is this meta ethics stuff? I haven't heard
Mhm.
about that." So I haven't gotten to all of that part of the dissertation. Mostly, I'll just be driving along, and I'll just hit the button, and it'll play Pat Flynn read by a robot going through the dissertation, and
It's very funny, man.
it's a lot more peaceful than one might think. It
Yeah.
really is a zen calm as you're slowly guided through the implications of DDS, and you fight off the ostrich nominalists and others. It's exciting stuff. So,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I'm glad you think so. But it was very fruitful. I was very happy with the sort of the course, and as tends to be the case, and I knew this going in. Almost everybody has very wide ambitions with a
Mhm.
dissertation, and mine were very wide indeed. I wanted
Mhm.
to show like, hey, the doctrine of divine simplicity can just do everything for everyone,
Yeah.
right? No matter
Yeah.
what your problem is, it's got your
What's the DDS?
if you've got male pattern baldness, it's probably because you deny the
It's a
doctrine of
privation,
divine
and
simplicity.
that's privation mean. Yeah, yeah, uh-huh.
So, as things went along, I had to restrict my scope. So the section on male pattern baldness unfortunately did not make it in. But I'm still pretty happy with how much I did get away with because I
Mhm.
covered, I think, a considerable amount of territory but still at considerable depth. So
Mhm.
I mean, like you see the beginning. I'm going pretty deep into a traditional Thomistic constituent ontology. I'm
Mhm.
defending that ontology. I think I'm advancing the conversation, as philosophers like to. That's how I like to say that they're being useful, right? I'm
Cool.
advancing the conversation, right?
Mhm.
And then I look at DDS itself as understood, as emerging from that constituent ontology. I look at the kind of contemporary landscape of the literature, I review it, and I think I advanced the conversation again with a number of objections. And then after that, it's all sort of, you know, uh, application. So I start sort of philosophy of God. I say, here's why DDS is essential for the complete intelligibility of reality for PSR, why it's essential for God's aseity, self sufficiency, I'm even a little provocative. I even say self-explanation. So I've got
Ooh.
a whole
Mhm.
lot in what I mean by explanation, why you can have internal explanations, essentialist explanations, and why DDS can give you a very robust form of PSR where everything can be explained.
Mhm.
You just have to hold that not everything needs an outside explanation, right? So philosophy of God's kind of the first section. Then I go into constituent ontology. And this is stuff we've talked about before in your show, Jake. People can check it out with this sort of Malarian cosmological argument. I argue that
Oh, we
there's a priority problem in
Mhm.
certain forms of constituent ontologies, the ones that I think are most plausible, such that any everyday familiar object, EFOs. Everyone talks about UFOs, but it's the EFOs you got to watch out for.
Oh.
And why do you got to watch out for EFOs, the everyday familiar objects?
Uh-huh.
Because they're essentially walking contradictions. I argue, unless they are deeply dependent entities. So what I develop a very technical sort of argument, borrowing from Father Barry Miller, great inspiration, where you have metaphysical composites, namely beings of essence and existence, where there's a real priority problem that results in a contradictory implication unless you have an extrinsic unifier of these constituents. That's a very quick summary. That sets you up for a regress, causal regress issue. I have a whole section on why that regress must terminate, and then
Mhm.
that gets you back to the absolutely simple God. So it is a cosmological argument, but what I'm really interested in is showing how you can stabilize constituent ontology, avoid these priority problems, which is kind of a general issue, I think. And I think it's an interesting one. And then also how that relates to the literature on metaphysical grounding and fundamentality and whether, grounding chains can just go on forever and ever and ever. And I say they can't. So there's just like lots of issues that I'm
Mhm.
trying to like,
Mhm.
bring into the, into my world of just being like singularly focused on like philosophy of God and stuff like that.
It's pretty
Mhm.
step by step, honestly. For
Mhm.
listeners who are just like constituent ontology and calm down. It does move step by step through the dissertation. So
Yeah.
I think most people who are kind of read up on some of these issues are going to be able to jump in and follow along decently, especially if they read the Thumper stories. Funny part. I took
Right.
the Thumper stories, which were built off of the Malarian argument, or the first one is. And just for fun, I dumped in your dissertation and then the Thumper stories into Opus.
Wow.
And just see any similarities? It's like, what the heck is going on? Why is this children's story track the and it concluded interestingly that you're writing Thumper stories under a pen name of J.P. Buscher.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
okay, this clearly tracks, clearly very similar things going on here. The person who wrote the dissertation has been writing stories about an imaginary map.
Could it have just been an inspiration or a friend, right?
And
Just
I'm
as they
like,
go
all
to.
right,
Yeah,
cool,
yeah,
cool.
it's funny.
Just
Cool, man.
but yeah, I thought that would be fun to dump both in and be like, what does it see? But yeah, hopefully listeners are basically familiar with that. I mean, to kind of fill it out for the people who aren't, is you trace out an actual contradiction, which
Yeah.
is a lot better than just a lot of cosmological arguments. A lot hinges on things like just finding that there's no regress. And there's kind of the classic arguments against regress that people
Right.
pound against from different sides. Or it goes down to the principle of sufficient reason we just take to be, come on, we got to hold it. Ergo, we arrive at a conclusion.
Yeah.
But this is like, if you find an actual contradiction,
Hmm.
that's kind of a hard stop. You have to pivot around that.
Yeah. So,
Um,
so I
so it's
think,
yeah, well,
yeah.
fill them in for the people who had not
Right.
necessarily read.
Yeah.
What
So
did
let's
we
we kind
arrive?
of we kind of like started at the deep end of the metaphysical swimming
We
pool. So
did.
let's go back
That's
to
how
the
we do.
let's go back to the kiddie pool
That's where you
and
dive
back up.
in. This is how swimming
All
works.
right.
I used to
So
teach swimming many years ago. You dive in the deep end, and then you just kinda paddle on to the other end. You
yeah,
don't
you,
wanna be hitting the
you figure it out as you go along. And look, there's actually something to that. I think like if you want to get into philosophy, just go.
mhm,
You're
mhm.
not gonna like understand a lot of it at first, but you just dive in. You
Yeah.
start getting as much as you can, and eventually you're swimming.
Uh-huh.
You're swimming,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. So whatever. Yeah. So cosmological reasoning. What we're doing here is we're trying to take some like broad feature of the world and argue that it is best or only kind of fairly common form. is an argument from contingency. Contingency seems to be an obvious feature of the world that some things are or need not have been or could have been otherwise. You then take some form of the principle of sufficient reason that says, hey, all contingent things require an outside explanation. That gets you a necessary thing. And then you got to give some arguments of why that necessary thing is got. Okay.
Mhm.
I actually think those arguments are pretty good because
I like them.
I think they're pretty good. Yeah, right, honestly, I think arguments for PSR are like, to my mind, like way better than arguments against it. And I
Well,
think
it's
like,
more than that. It's also like
yeah,
it's like you just gotta put it to test in reality. To say that I reject the PSR and that I believe it to be false, and then to try to assemble any semblance of a worldview or function in reality
yeah,
is just practically impossible.
I agree.
So it's a pet peeve of mine when skeptics treat a negation of something as entirely neutral. Like, "Oh, I just don't believe it." It's like, is this a psychological state whereby you cannot assent 100%, at which point it's
Hmm.
trivial, or are you making a positive claim that something is indeed false in reality? Because if it's
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
second, then all of a sudden I gotta see your side of it, playing Mr.
Yes, right.
Skeptic isn't enough. So when you say PSR is false, show me how that works. Otherwise, it's
And
not
and
on the
and it's not enough just to give like a few like peculiar, like alleged counterexamples, right? Which I think we can easily deal with. You have to also show how it can be false, and we can still hold on to irrationality. Sorry, how we can still hold on to rationality or avoid like radical, at least empirical skepticism. And I've never seen any adequate accounts of that, right?
Rather than that, it's like you also have to affirm, even if you say the principle of sufficient reason is not operative all the time, it does certainly seem like it is operative in some cases. That's why they have to reach for edge cases to prove their point. But the edge case doesn't disprove that it's operative in other areas or at different times or places, etc. So now you have a kind of meta question of why is it that we seem to rely on the principle of sufficient reason in some domains, but we find exceptions in other domains. So now we have to have some type of causal principle, oddly enough, or some type of story or explanation to seat the fact that
Hmm.
it is operative sometimes and not operative other times. Like
Hmm. Hmm.
that seems hard. I mean, there are the people who bite the bullet and say, "Fine, it's operative none of the time," but then that just goes back to the first issue of how the heck are you gonna
But
function in
notice
reality?
even if you say it's operative some of the time and not all the time, presumably you want an explanation for why, and you either have one or you don't, right?
Mhm,
So you're either back to PSR is either true or it's false, right?
mhm,
Now these like kind of like alleged counterexamples are helpful, but they're not helpful to the extent of like showing that the PSR is false. Again, I don't think that that's tenable, and we'll get back to my argument in a minute because I think it's useful because it doesn't require PSR. They're useful for helping you to understand how restricted PSR should be. So I
mhm.
myself reject certain forms of PSR
Sure.
insofar as you think that everything has an explanation means that everything one either requires an outside explanation. I think that's false, but that
Mhm.
is that is an assumption that is held by a number of contemporary grounding theorists, for example.
Huh.
So I think that's false. That version of PSR is false. It leads to all sorts of issues. I also think that if you think that for something to be explained, it has to be in some sense determined. I think that is
Mhm.
also false, right?
Uh-huh.
So, and then what you find is that like once you understand that there are versions of PSR that don't commit you to either of those things, then you can deal with stuff from quantum mechanics or
Right.
libertarian freedom is another one,
Yep,
right? Like
yep.
I'm a libertarian guy, not politically, but with
Mhm,
respect to agency. So for me, I think that we should be able to have a genuine explanation with respect to human agency that is uh, uh, that isn't determinism, right?
mhm,
So that
mhm,
means whatever I want to say about PSR, it has to be compatible with that. And I have one. I think that when it comes to human agency, we can explain that we make choices through an essentialist power, the power of the will. The power of the will just is the power to end deliberation
mhm,
upon motives that are not themselves inherently determining, because none of them is the good as such, and the will is only determined to the good as such.
mhm,
So the will just is the power to end deliberation, to say, I choose you. And this is an essentialist powers based explanation. Nothing determines it, but you still get an adequate explanation because it's reasons based for
mhm.
why I chose, vanilla rather than chocolate ice cream, right? So maybe you have to say something about why you don't go in for certain contrastive explanations, but that's fine. So all this, these are all technicalities, right? But I say they all can be dealt with. I think a very modest, plausible version of PSR is not just obviously true. I think it's indispensable for rationality, but I also think it's always going to be strong enough to run a cosmological argument. That's the key,
Mhm.
right? That's the key. All right. So now back to what I'm up to. You're right that the PSR is more controversial than the principle of non-contradiction. So if we can like get an argument that doesn't rely on PSR, presumably there's I don't know, some sort of advantage there. But mine does a little bit more than that. I think my argument actually gives you the PSR at the end of the day, right? It doesn't assume PSR, but it can deliver it to you, and it can deliver a specific version.
Mhm.
And the way this works is, yes, we've got a constituent ontology. And granted, this you already have to be kind of on board with this ontology, but I spent a very large chunk of my dissertation arguing why
But
you
that's
why
how
you should be.
dissertations work.
Yeah,
It's
you can't you
basically, I'm
can't
not
can't
gonna
cover
cover
everything.
this, I'm not gonna cover that. This is covered elsewhere. I'm gonna
Yeah.
gesture towards this, but not to that. More
Right. But
reading this way, more reading that way. A lot of it's just carving out exactly what you're going to say. Like it or not, that's kinda necessary, lest reviewer 2 comes and attacks and goes, "You never covered this."
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's just always a game of, reviewer roulette, whether you'll get that or not. But right. So I say, like, look, you've got these beings, and I'll give the condensed summary. They're metaphysical composites of an essence or whatness element and an existence or an isness element. But excuse me, the problem is there's logical priority to the essence element because it's sort of the individuating element, right? The
Mhm.
existence of Pat or the existence of Thumper the rabbit is completed by or individuated by the essence element. So that means the conceptual construction, and I argue that these beings have to be at least conceptually constructible if it's even going to be sensible to call them composites, must begin with the essence element. So this is a little technical, but just speed along me here, right?
Mhm.
So there's real priority here to
Mhm.
the construction of these composites with the essence element. It's not temporal, right? This is just purely logical ontological priority. The problem is, apart from its existence, it's literally nothing. It's capable of nothing. You can't even say that it has the property of being able to individuate its existence.
Mhm.
So what you end up with when you kind of spell all this out is you have beings that both must be made up of parts and cannot be made up of parts, right? This is the contradictory implication that we get out of. How to resolve it? Well, you have something else that can supply the missing capacity, right? That can supply the capacity for Thumper or whatever else to individuate its existence, and jointly, is that which brings about the unity of those constituents, right?
Mhm.
And that is an extrinsic cause. Okay. But what is that extrinsic cause? Is it itself a metaphysical composite, or is it something else, which would just be like an absolutely simple peak, something that does not have these constituent parts that have this sort of deep, mutual priority relation? And I say mutual priority relation because that the essence element is prior with respect to individuation or completion, but the existence element is prior with respect to actuality.
Mhm.
All right. So what I argue then is that the sort of causality going on here is one of deep metaphysical dependence. It's really akin to a form of constitutive grounding, and what I argue at length in two places in my dissertation, but I also have the seeds of this in an article in the Review of Metaphysics, where I'm asking if essentially ordered causation just is a form of metaphysical grounding.
Mhm.
I argue that the sort of logic of this sort of causal chain is a reduplicative expression where if you don't have some final terminating member, you're never able to form a categorically closed sentence. Okay,
Mhm.
so what am I saying there, right? So what I'm saying is that the way you capture this non-modular form of grounding or constitutive dependence is in a sort of deeply dependent causal sequence that, unless it has a terminating member, you never actually ever say anything, right? You never have a complete statement, as it were. And if you
Yep.
don't have a complete statement, you obviously can't explain anything, because if you can't say anything, you can't explain anything. And if you can't explain anything, then it's not a causal series. And why is that? Well, because whatever else you want to say about causality, the reason we even bring causality into question is to answer some sort of question, right?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
is a sort of explanation. So if it's non-explanatory, it's non-causal. So you get another contradiction in the sense that you're saying that it's both a causal series that is non-causal, right? So I'm trying to show that with just a principle of contradiction, you can get all the way through to this fundamental primary being that is by necessity um, incomposite. It's metaphysically simple. Its essence just is its existence. So a lot of technicalities that were glossed over there, but that's the general strategy that I'm taking. And what I argue is that if that's right, then it's the case that um, no no object apart from this simple being. And I have arguments for why there can only be one simple being. I argue in Thomistic fashion that all forms of duplication require composition, right? So if there's an
Mhm.
absolutely simple being, it's uniquely unique, it's one and only one. Everything else will be a metaphysical composite, whether it's an angel or a rock or whatever. None of these things can exist unless they are deeply caused to exist. Otherwise, they're contradictory structures. And what I think that gives you is solid grounds for saying there's no brute facts. There's nothing out there that just exists that seems like it should have some further explanation, but does not. That's actually impossible on this metaphysical scheme. So everything that's out there that does exist has at least some adequate explanation for its existence, either in virtue of some sort of extrinsic cause, which is the case for
Mhm.
most things, or in virtue of its own nature. And for God, I say, well, its nature just is its existence. So we
Right.
have a nice essentialist explanation for why God exists. There's nothing else that God could possibly do but exist, given
Exactly.
his nature. So I don't know how much of that landed or made sense, but that's what I'm up to. But you can see how I don't assume PSR. I try to kind of deliver it to people at the end. Yeah.
So how do you I mean, I don't know. I mean, hey, I was driving when I was listening to the dissertation. I've been out of the, philosophical space for a little bit, lots of other projects. So if you already kinda went through this in the dissertation, let me know.
I may have
But
forgot. It's been a while since I refreshed on it. Bring it, make me like try to re-download a bunch of
done.
stuff in real time here. Yeah.
Like, lock that up. There is kind of a challenge, like, how do you bring somebody, who's not, say, a theist and also doesn't subscribe to big tent Platonism even. They're just kind of a random secular dude, and you want to show them with an argument like this that God is purely simple and
Yeah.
that everything only exists qua its dependence on something else. Um, Finally terminating in God. The issue seems to be that
Rock and roll.
y- yeah, yeah, get some hydration. Um,
Imagine a guy looking like me comes up to you on the bus.
yeah,
Yeah, that's gonna go well. I don't care how well the argument's formulated. This is just not a good. This is just not a good play, my friend.
no, no, this is not a barroom one, but there is a little bit of a difficulty to maneuver around where you say, "Listen, in order to understand,
No, yeah. Mhm.
divine simplicity, you're gonna have to have certain metaphysical principles and a system in place."
Yeah.
Like, well, right, of course you do. The
Yep.
issue is, as you start to examine the metaphysical system itself, you encounter the contradiction.
Mhm.
So in a way, it's like you're trying to walk over to God, and then you find a broken bridge. Now,
Yep.
ironically, once you get to God, the bridge is fixed, but the bridge kind of is broken before you can get to
Yeah.
God. So
So
it's a little bit
what somebody
weird
could do,
take
and I
on
acknowledge
it.
as my
You see what I
dissertation, is you could say this is a reason to reject the constituent ontology,
Uh-huh.
right?
Okay.
Because it
Okay.
has these.
Got it.
Yeah, I do. Of
Ooh.
course, I cover that. Jake, what do you think? I'm an idiot.
I was merging at that
And
point,
yeah, no,
driving
no. And
along.
so I wanna say two things because there's a wider point here, and one is like with respect to apologetic effectiveness,
This is
and
not the go-to. Yeah.
like I want to say this is close to useless there, right?
No, give yourself
Maybe
more
not
credit.
entirely, but it's pretty close, right? In
Yeah.
terms of like for people who are really trying to, I think, very interested in the truth of things, they care about metaphysics, they care about understanding God and causality and why things have the character they do, which I'm into that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
Then I think it's a different conversation. But guy on the street, like, please do not say, "Have you seen Pat Flynn's dissertation?" Like, please,
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want that burden on my shoulders. And the short answer,
Okay, so for the academic who
yeah.
I don't know, we'll
So
pause right here and I'll give you more
let's
credit.
swing back to the apologetic thing. So,
Okay.
but to your answer, is it reason to reject the constituent ontology? The answer is yeah. Somebody could swing that way, but of course, somebody could have gotten gotten off the truck even before they got to the contradictory implication, right? They could have been like,
Mhm.
well, I don't buy constituent ontology to begin with. So why should I? So that's a totally different debate, right? And of course, I'm going to say, and I do say in my dissertation, I spend a bit of time of why I think constituent ontology is the way to go and why in particular the Thomistic one is the
Uh-huh.
best way to go.
Uh-huh.
I think
Right.
it's I think it is extremely fruitful with respect to descriptive and explanatory metaphysics for making sense of causation, change, identity through time. You get real laws of nature. It's super scientific and philosophy of nature. So I wouldn't give one argument for it. I would give a, and I try to do this in dissertation, a very substantive cumulative case
I did get
for
through
it.
that. No, and that's great. Like, a lot of people are gonna get that far and say, "This makes a lot more sense than the alternatives." And
Mhm.
then when they see the contradiction, that really is a point where they go, "Ooh,
Yeah, you have a
okay,
choice,
I
right?
need divine simplicity, or I need to backtrack. This is a lovely little path, but the
Yeah.
bridge is broken unless it's fixed from the other side here."
And but that's sort of the nature of arguments, isn't it, Jake? Right? What do arguments, good arguments, do? They kind of force you, right,
Mhm.
to go one way or another, to either pick something up or give something up.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I think that if we're trying to go into philosophy with the right sort of expectations, that's what we do, right? A philosopher is really what we're trying to do is raise costs, right?
Mhm.
Like, okay, here's
Mhm.
my argument.
Yep.
Here's a way you can avoid it, but here are the costs. Here's what it's going to cost you. So yeah, somebody can get to that point in my argument, and they might be like, I'm not going towards this God stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm going to turn the other way around, and I'm going to be like, all right, but that's going to cost you,
Mhm.
and it's
Mhm.
going to cost you a lot. And I think it's obviously way costlier and far more irrational than just taking the clearly simple solution of a simple being.
Uh-huh. So I have a little
Done.
almost
That's
yeah.
I don't know what.
Yeah. So my little 2 3/4-year-old is now
Mhm.
asking incredible questions like, "Who made God?" Which I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, heck yeah. He's finally ready to talk metaphysics." And I've been reading him the Thumper story, and he's starting to memorize little sections of it.
Mhm.
So if you ask him what things are ultimately made of, he will say essence and existence, which is like, "Hell yeah." That's right, little dude. So the way I've tried to explain it is, I say, "Okay." So I show him my hands. I say that, "No, you're made of 2 things, okay? You're made of a David. That's what you are. What are you?" And he's like, "David." I'm like, "That's right. So you're a David. And then you're made of existence, and that makes you a real David. You see?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "But if you take the real away, if you take the existence away, well, you're a David, but you're not a real David." He's like, "Okay, got it." And I'm like, "And if you take away the David, well then, well, what is it?" "I don't know." I'm like, "Okay, so it's not a David yet until it's a real David." He's like, "Got it,
Mhm.
got it." And I'm like, "Okay, so God is," and I just show him my fist, and I just point, and I say, "He's just real God. That's what he is. He's just he's just real. That's what he is. Just real God." And I'm like, "See, just one piece, just one." And
Mhm.
he can get that much.
Yeah.
Which is
Mhm.
like, and
It's
then
fun.
once that,
It's
like,
fun.
concretes in
Yeah.
his mind, like, the questions just get better, which is
Mhm.
amazing. It's like, y you can is that perfect? Kind of, and I mean, Aquinas kinda uses, real is, what existence is that which causes something to be, real.
Yeah, I say, existence is that in virtue of which a thing and all of its properties
There
have
you go.
real presence, right?
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So, I think that a lot of times existence is more abstract than real for kids, but I'm like, real has a Thomistic backing there, we'll use real.
And
And
like
that makes sense because kids are
it's
kind of in the world of, is it imaginary? Is it
mhm,
real? Is it this? So they actually already have some of the machinery in their mind
mhm.
to divide things which are real and not real, and to understand things in abstraction.
Yeah.
And a helpful hand motion or two, and little dude's almost there. He's cooking. He's cooking.
Yeah, you gotta, you always gotta start, with this. And the ironic thing about divine simplicity is one of the most difficult, not simple things to try to wrap
Uh-huh,
your mind around in
uh-huh.
the
It
world,
only
right? I've been, spending a very, very long time, many, many years trying to understand it as much as I endorse it and as fruitful as I think it is. Now I want to swing back to the other point about like why should you had a couple questions there, like the one is the apologetic useless. How do you convince the guy that God is real? Well, certainly not this argument. I think the best thing there is I don't know, look at miracle cases or something. Everyone's talking about Fatima and stuff like that again. The simple stuff, right? That convinces most people. Use the stuff that convinces most people to convince most people, right?
Uh-huh.
Not obscure metaphysical arguments, right? But why should God be simple? Well, I think if my argument is good, that gives you one reason to think that God is simple. But also, I have this other article coming out in American Catholic Philosophical Quarterly. It won I was surprised about this, but delighted it won their annual Rising Scholar essay contest, and it's
Woohoo.
itself is a sort of modification of what's in my dissertation.
Mhm.
And I'm arguing that, if God is to be God, then God has to be simple because a composite is a technical term. Composite doesn't just mean something is complex. Something can be complex but not composite. Things can have conceptual complexity and real distinctions don't amount to composition. A composite is something that is literally built up or made up from stuff, things,
Mhm.
constituents, parts that is more basic than itself, right?
Mhm.
So a composite is something that is just metaphysically downstream or derivative from its component parts. That's what a composite is. So I argue that just divine simplicity really just follows from some fairly straightforward conceptual truths about what we mean by God and what we mean by composition. Whatever else we mean by God, and successful reference to God is a tricky question. But I think it's a non-negotiable that when we're talking about God, that we're at least not talking about something that is dependent, derivative, caused. Right at that point, we just don't have God in mind
Right.
anymore. Okay.
Right.
But that's just what a composite is, right? God is ultimate. Whatever else God is ultimate. But a composite is just not ultimate. It's downstream of whatever it is built up from.
Mhm.
So that's like that I call like the modest, argument for simplicity. I think everybody should be on board with that notion of simplicity. And a lot of people are when you present it to them. Where they start getting like grouchy and barky is when you like cash it out optimistically.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? And
Oh, I
then
know
like,
exactly what you
yeah.
mean. I can
But
feel it.
but
I
but
know
then
you.
where I go from there is like, well, you should cash it out optimistically because that actually helps make the most sense. And it's the
Mhm.
most explanatorily fruitful way of understanding and articulating divine simplicity. So I don't like back away from the Thomistic. I lean heavily into it, obviously.
Well, you
But at
know,
least
you
like I at least try to like show with like a sort of more minimalist, modest, like not as many upfront metaphysical commitments, why like what the basic logic of simplicity is.
Mhm.
And so that's step one, get people there. And I think, almost everyone should accept that. There are some people that deny it. Um, and then after that, okay, what's the best way to understand this? What's the most theoretically fruitful way to understand it? Then I argue that it's the Thomistic, within the Thomistic metaphysic. Yeah.
I always hear the issue of, well, hang on, God's power isn't his wisdom because power is not wisdom and that kind of stuff. And you had a good answer to that saying, well, hang on. What you're objecting to is that power is not wisdom in the finite world as understood in this non like limit case kind of scenario. What we're talking
Yeah.
about, like the maximum possible power and love and whatnot, that's something that we don't have any type of epistemic access to. So
Hmm.
the claim that these two things are not identical in that case is to make a claim about two things that one has never seen and doesn't have access to, and then to claim that they're dissimilar, which would
Yeah.
be impossible in the comparison.
Yeah. So the objection is something like this because it is true that for Thomists, whatever is in God is God, is the
Mhm.
cliche saying, right? So whatever God's power is whatever God's knowledge is just whatever God is, right? Yeah, that's Thomists are committed to that. And then somebody will say, well, look at this battery.
Mhm.
It's got power but not knowledge.
Yeah.
So your system
Good for
is refuted and it is trash and get it out of here, right? Okay, well that's just not even like taking 5 minutes to try to understand the
We've
Thomistic
never
system,
heard of
right?
that. Clearly, we've
Yeah,
never
yeah,
heard
it's
of that one. Yeah.
devastated.
No.
So right, so notice that I was careful. I say like whatever God's power is, whatever
Mhm.
God's knowledge is. When we're talking about God's power and God's knowledge, we're clearly saying something like power is
Mhm.
identical to something like knowledge in God. And this gets you into the classic, controversial doctrine of analogy. But I
Mhm.
avoid that by just using Miller's case. I developed this as well, of limit case theology. And the idea is something like this. You can have an ordered series of things that clearly converge upon a certain limit case, and that necessarily bear a real similarity to that limit case, but where the limit case is not itself a member of the ordered series.
Mhm.
Think an ordered series of polygons of increasing sides and angles. What is it converging towards? Clearly a circle, right?
Mhm.
So there's a real similarity there, but it's not like a usual kind of similarity where there's just some like obvious property in common. At most, you could say like circularity is imperfectly instantiated, right? In
Mhm.
the ordered series until you get to the limit case, right?
Uh-huh.
But a circle's not a polygon, right? So yeah, yeah. So rock and roll, right? And what I say is that like this is the way to understand divine simplicity. You have an ordered series of all these purely positive perfections. Perfections that don't inherently entail a limit, like power, love, goodness, so on, knowledge. And that traditional cosmological reasoning gives you reason to think that all these sort of ordered series have one and the same limit case. And that whatever the limit case instance of power is identical to whatever the limit case instance of knowledge is. And that is God, and so on and so forth. And so, no matter what you want to say about the non limit case instances, and they're being really not the same being, there's no reason to think that the limit case instances aren't
Right.
identical. And
Right.
we have positive reason from this sort of cosmological form of argumentation to think that they can be and must be identical, even if we can't like fully comprehend them. So
Mhm.
that's how you deal with that objection. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Cool. What were your I mean, what were the parts that you think you landed the best throughout this whole entire process?
Oh, it's just knockout blow after knockout blow. I
Definitely.
mean, it was just
Definitely.
total. No, no, it was good. I mean, so
What are you most proud of? What do you think is the most unique?
I mean, I really wanted to do, um, I wanted to, so like what I'm doing generally is not original at all. I mean,
That's yes.
going way back to,
Mhm.
I mean, arguably Plato, but certainly Plotinus, and
Mhm.
all up through the, you know, uh, Christian and especially scholastic, tradition, and in Islam and Judaism as well. You see philosophers like kind of like all converging upon this absolutely simple reality for a variety of reasons. They think that
Uh-huh.
that it's really important, right? that reality terminates in this like simple absolute point of perfection, right? And what I'm trying to do is show that this is a good and correct strategy, and it has not even fully run its course because there's a number of issues in contemporary philosophy,
Mhm.
contemporary metaphysics, metaethics, epistemology, where this doctrine can still be applied. And really what I'm doing, I think, Jake, is for, I don't know, however long now, like the doctrine of divine simplicity has been playing a lot of defense, over the past year. And I've engaged in
Mm.
that.
Mhm.
And even in
Mhm.
the dissertation, other publications, I've said stuff about the objections to the coherence, like the one we just dealt with, the identity of
Yeah.
divine attributes, or
You
dealt
gotta
with
go on the offense.
modal collapse. And I just
Mhm.
really wanted to put it back on offense, right? Because like there's like everyone's attacking this, but they like so many people forgot like why was this so strongly held
Uh-huh.
for so long? And it's not even it's not just a Christian thing, it's not just a Catholic thing. I mean, historical traditional Protestantism, got lots of Protestants
Yeah.
today are
Is
very strong advocates of divine simplicity. You see it in Islam, at least certain, that's
this
other, yeah. Um Judaism, the pagans,
uh-huh.
Hinduism, right? It's like,
Yeah, some
and the
people.
reason it's held is because it's true. Right? Right?
Yeah.
If God is
Yeah.
to be God, God has to be absolutely, and there's good arguments for it.
Mhm.
And there's seriously bad implications if you deny it. So what I was trying to do is just show lots of good reasons for believing in divine simplicity. Again,
Mhm.
philosophy of God, metaphysics, metaethics, epistemology, philosophical anthropology, religious worship, right? Sort of. So even though I think some of my arguments are like really, really punchy and not to be immodest, but I think dispositive,
Mhm.
in and of themselves, I really also wanted to kind of present a cumulative case at
Got
the
it.
same time. I guess where like what I'm most proud of, I was very happy about that essay contest thing.
I read that. But
Yeah,
a year,
I
2
what
years ago?
so like I was, but that's like proud of in like yeah, I think I probably sent you an earlier draft of it. It
Yeah, yeah,
hasn't even
yeah.
come out yet. It's due out in the next issue
Oh, in that
of
case, I got the
American
very
Catholic.
early
Yeah.
draft, yeah.
Um and like I think what I do there is what I'm doing there is I'm looking at all these proposed models to divine simplicity and showing why they really fail to secure God's ultimacy, independent self-explanation. So, but what I'm saying is like I'm proud of that, because it won something. But
Uh-huh.
where I think I was like more, maybe even a bit more creative and interesting, is with the meta ethics stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's I mean, well, we get to hit some of that stuff because that I haven't got that far yet.
and because it was surprising to me. I wasn't even like, this was like kind of low on my list of priority stuff to even get to it, but then I did get to it, and it just kind of kept going and going and going. Now, like I said, I've spent the past couple months like really in the weeds of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So kinda trace out its axis, or are we doing some type of convertibility thesis? Are we looking at, like, teleology, divine
Yeah.
intents kinda thing? Like, what's the mechanism of getting to answering moral questions? I assume you're trying to, like, ground moral facts? What are you
Yeah, so I'm
intending to
trying to
do?
show
What's
that
yeah.
the doctrine of divine simplicity, and as it is understood and emerging from the Thomistic framework, right? So
Mhm.
I'm not just saying simple God and nothing else. I'm saying no. Thomism and
Uh-huh.
divine simplicity in
Right.
particular is fruitful. So I'm embracing the whole package, right?
Mhm.
And I'm endorsing it. Um and I'm trying to show that it offers a very, very solid basis for robust moral realism. So I'm not arguing for moral realism, but there's lots of people who do that and propose robust moral realism. And I'm saying this system, and in
Would
particular divine
secure
simplicity,
that.
is a really good foundation for it. And now, what is all in robust moral realism? Well, there is moral facts. You already brought those up, right? But also that, and this is sometimes I think it's helpful to separate out that those moral facts are stance independent, right? So
Mhm.
they're not just determined by my fancies, right? Or my desires or my whims, right? Something is really good, really bad, really right, really wrong, whether I desire it or have a fancy for it or not, right? Like even if I wanted to torture you for fun, it doesn't matter how badly I want to do that, it's still wrong. I should never do it. It's bad. All right. So
And
then
this
it's
is the direction I endorse, by the way, because I don't know. I've become more and more pessimistic about moral arguments for God. In
Mhm.
fact, normally I think a lot of them actually kind of like are a little bit backwards, where oftentimes people argue that the universe would never bring about moral beings, and yet moral beings exist, ergo God. And I'm like, hang on.
Yeah, there's a
If,
lot of steps that need to be
if
taken there, friend. Right. Yeah.
yeah, and then like if the universe is made by God, then the universe ought to target moral beings. You say it doesn't. That would run in the inverse of what you're trying to show.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it's like there's a lot of problems I see. I also it's difficult to I mean, it's easy rhetorically to shake somebody and go, "Come on, just tell me that's a fact that you can't murder people for fun." And it's like, well, yeah, it is. But to actually like flesh that out and find out exactly why and how in a way that you can backtrack to an argument for God,
Yeah.
I'm kind of I don't it scores some points. I'm just not a fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
However, when you see it like in the pages of scripture, so like how does God kick off the law? He doesn't go with, "Hey guys, you all know." He goes, "I am the Lord." Okay. Let's get this thing going. Like 10 commandments, the rest of the other 603, let's get this thing done. So I think that to me that's my favorite angle.
Yeah.
Kick
Interesting.
God, and
Mhm.
then you can get to thick moral realism, and you can get to binding moral commands after you secure God. I struggle to swim up that stream.
Yeah, maybe. So I want to say there's even problems with that unless you go the way I want you to go, which is towards divine simplicity. And let me keep throwing out the kind of core features or desideratum of robust moral realism. So we covered two: moral facts, stance independence. The other one, which is very interesting, is constraint. There's substantive constraints on moral facts. It's just seems so intuitively the case that moral facts could not have just been all over the place, right? Right, that there's no possible world where it would be good for you to slander people or stuff like that, right? So there's constraints. There's like modal moral constraints, right?
Everybody intuitively feels this way, but I don't think they can always explain why.
Explain. Well, this
Yeah,
is something that needs to be explained,
right.
right? This is one of those features of, I would say, our moral experience that is, say, it calls out for explanation. And this is where like a sort of crude kind of like theistic theory of morality often like suffers like many lashes from the whip of Euthyphro, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So,
No,
like, is something good just because God wills it? What's the intuition that's rebelling against that? It's the intuition for constraint, because people want to say, well, even if God, willed that you rape or slander, like, there's no way that could be good, right? So I'm saying it's that feature constraint that's like behind the Euthyphro objection, at least landing on one horn of it. The other horn of Euthyphro is that there's something over and above God, which God must consult and
I think
whatever.
ultimately, yeah. I think the shorter hop for me is more of an Aristotelian one, is just to the nature of the thing. So if you say, is it good for I don't know, for men to grab onto the backs of women and slowly grow into them such that they can then create children? It's like, what? Of course not. Is that good for an anglerfish in the deep sea to do? Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
actually exactly what happens according to its nature. Yeah, and that
Yeah,
is good for it. So I think a lot of these things, the first stop on the road is you have to say that there's an actual type of nature that the thing has, such that there is good which relates to it.
yeah. Well, hold on, we're getting there.
Oh,
We're
yeah,
getting there.
go
It's
ahead.
all in the distance because I say that Aristotelianism and essentialism is useful, uh, but it has problems, right? So insofar as an Aristotelian, and not all of them want to do this, but a number of some, at least some do, or at least some take that this is the implication of it. Want to equate goodness with function, you have evil teloi objections, right? Well, what if something just has the end of
Like a
of
pirate, right? Or something,
raping or pillaging, right? Right, yeah.
uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, it
And
does, it makes it.
and look, prions and viruses are interesting. I had talked about those in my paper
Oh,
too,
cool.
right?
I
As
oof,
this
love
is
your
this is my
prions,
nasty, nasty.
but
Look at you.
yeah, it
But
does
I'm not as dumb as I look. I do anticipate objections, right?
it does beg the question, though. You say, "Well, it's flourishing is what we're looking for."
Yeah,
It's like, well, what
yeah.
the heck is
So
flourishing? What is the
what?
standard by which
Yeah,
we would say a thing has a nature that causes it to flourish? It
yeah.
can't just be because it is that thing.
So what
That would
I'm
be
ultimately going to say is that something isn't good because it's a thing's function.
mhm,
Things have the functions they do because they come from the good, capital G.
uh-huh,
Goodness constrains functions. Goodness is primary. All right. And then, yes, we will have to deal with the nasty creatures, but we'll get there. Right.
mhm,
But once you have that, you're going to be able to kind of specify the teleology under these sort of moral modal constraints, such
mhm,
that anything has the function it does because and here's where divine simplicity comes in, because it in some way bears an appropriate fittingness or ontological affinity to God.
uh-huh,
Now, divine simplicity matters because God doesn't just have goodness features or goodness properties, right? God isn't good because of good making properties.
mhm,
That would be a problem, right? Because
mhm,
then we're really just falling on some variant of Euthyphro at that
uh-huh,
point. Given Thomism, and you mentioned it before, the convertibility thesis of goodness and existence, God is as the unrestricted existent is the unrestricted good. He's literally the form of the good, right?
mhm,
That's what God is. The paradigm good, just as he's the paradigm existent. And on Thomism, what you have is the theory of divine ideas. So I say that every possible being is just really something that in some way God sees as resembling some aspect of his purely positive nature,
and that
right?
drops right out of if you accept the real distinction and you say, "Okay, then your essence is abound on
Right.
existence." It's just like, well, then definitely you are mirroring, something about God, but in a bounded and limited way.
Yeah. And this is going to give you things that always have an orientation towards some positive actuality. They could never
Mhm,
have an orientation towards a privation as such, like a being that's ordered toward ignorance or rape or something like that. So this gives you, I think, like serious metaphysical constraints
yeah,
for robust moral realism. But pretty neat,
because
huh?
otherwise
All right.
you'd be
And then
saying,
what do you say about viruses and nasty creatures? All right. So real quick,
"The prion."
First, like
Okay.
people go to, yeah, viruses, prions, and
Mhm,
or pathogens and parasites and all this stuff. But like, look, man, I just got two kittens.
mhm,
Um, those things are pretty nasty. It's like we're a little bit selective in what we call nasty. Like these things are killers, right? They're killers.
uh-huh,
Um, so first off, nothing that's not rational is formally ordered towards a privation, right? That's the first thing. It might be like
okay.
materially resembling it, but it's not. It's not and cannot be formally ordered toward it. So that already alleviates a big thing. The other thing I want to say is that look, we can't. determine the nature of certain things, even viruses or whatever, as like little self-enclosed kingdoms. Like it's not like biologists tell us what the nature of something is, full stop. Because a lot of things in Thomism, their nature is determined by a wider whole
Mhm.
which specifies them. You see what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, yeah.
My cells have the nature they do because they are part of me, their intelligibility. So, like, take like autophagy, right?
Mhm.
This is a good example. If you just looked at it by itself, it just seems like purely destructive, right? But then when you see the wider whole, you realize, okay, it's not actually ordered towards just destruction, full stop. It's ordered towards quality control, homeostasis. So what I'm saying is like perspective matters,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
No, that's great, and I mean,
Yeah,
it's
and we might not know. We might not have any idea what, like, the larger role that these things are ordered towards might be. But for all we know, they might just be purely spiritual goods in a fallen world, right? That God
mhm.
permits these things. Who knows? I don't have to give an answer to that. I just have to say that all I have to say is this. If we have independent reasons for my thesis, the data is undetermined. It's ambiguous. And
Mhm.
so depending on how strong you think those independent reasons are for my thesis will cause you to interpret the data, say of viruses or whatever, in one way, right? In a more optimistic way, rather than just say, oh, it's this is purely just an evil or nasty thing. You see what I'm saying?
Uh-huh. Yeah, I
Right.
think
So
metaphysically
I
speaking.
don't want to like say it's for this because I don't know what that one now, right?
Right, right.
But I do want to say we don't have any examples of things that are formally ordered towards privation as such. That's just not out there, right? Like rape or ignorance or something like that. We have
Mhm.
things that seem to be materially resembling such an order, right? And we have just gave a bunch of examples of those. But local destruction, local harm, and stuff that is that's obvious. We grant all that. That's nothing new. But whether we can say with metaphysical confidence at all that these are like evil beings is that's going way beyond the empirical data. That's something that's something that I would argue is really an instance where your theory itself kind of has to determine the data because the data is not itself determinative in and of itself. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? Yeah.
So, I mean, if you say that God is, if we take the convertibility thesis, which I think
Mhm.
can be independently defended, and then you say, well, we're going to posit the idea of a being which is just evil, then what you're saying is a being, okay, we're calling it a being, and yet it has no goodness. However, if goodness is convertible to being, then it has no being. And you're imagining some type of that. You're trying to take non-being and draw a little essence circle around it and go, bang, I popped out a being. That
And
seems
it's ordered to that as well.
Mhm.
Yeah. I would argue it's metaphysically incoherent on that picture. And the other thing that I say is like, it's I don't know exactly where the line is. Like I don't have a strict criterion to show where something is just like very deficient with respect to affinity to God versus like being, to borrow a term from Alex Bruce, counter imitative, right? A counter like, but we know like some examples are obviously counter imitative, like something that would be ordered towards ignorance, for example,
Uh-huh.
right? Um, where is that line exactly? I don't know, but we don't have to know where the line is to know when something's clearly over it.
Mhm.
You see what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And there's things can also be very close to the line where it's hard to tell, right? And it's going to be your wider motivation for your theory that's going to cause you to interpret them one way or another. You see what
And
I'm
if we
saying?
take the
Mhm,
context of, well, what is creation doing? Well, it's revealing God.
mhm.
Okay, well, does the prion or the virus or something reveal something about God? I mean, at the 30,000-foot view, you could say, yes, it does. It reveals that God intends for there to be a series of material beings, one after another, so that we're not like all shoulder to shoulder with immortal T Rexes till the end of time. It's
Mhm.
like, okay, that shows that he has a plan and purpose to bring about a series of different material creatures, one by one, in succession, and typically towards an end. I mean, especially the evolutionary
Yep.
theory kind of shows that there's a historical ordering towards an end, which did involve things which were locally destructive, but globally constructive, right? That's
Yeah.
kind of the whole
Yep.
base theory is that locally destructive actions can bring about globally productive ends.
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
what? Divine providence in history? May I give you that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I like so. I mean, granted, admittedly, some of it. This is in the tradition, right? You kind of have to engage in a little creative imagination. Like, well, how does a cat resemble God? How does a cat tail resemble God? Well,
Mhm.
stability. Like that's a right.
Funny, yeah.
God is the most stable thing. But hey, like
Um,
it's all rock and roll, man. That sounds plausible to me. Let's go, right?
so
But at the
so
end
I
of the
can
day,
say,
like
like,
at the end of the day, like it's some level of philosophy. That's just what you got, right?
yeah,
That's just
it's
what you
just like, "Well,
got.
I'm sorry, I'm not God." Okay.
And like again, like this isn't just like totally pie in the sky. Like I think there's really good independent reasons for this, and we're just kind of like now trying to deal with the hard cases that are
Right.
not like they can be plausibly interpreted in lots of different ways, right?
And
Mhm.
then it's one of those things that when you find a universal thing which is true and explains reality, that in no way means that you can then explain the particulars. Like, if I just find the formula that shows how long it takes for when I throw a ball in the air for it to come to, speed 0 and then back to my hand. Someone says, "Hey, I just threw an ice cube in the air. How long do you know that take?" I'm like, "I don't know." Like, you didn't tell me anything about this situation. I can only tell it to you in abstraction. When you get to the actual particular point, I can only tell you as much as I know from the universal without having total knowledge of your particular instance. So it's like, well, can we tell you why a cat images God? It's like, yes, we can in abstraction. But to do that in a particular way means that we have to have a particular and thoroughgoing view of cats, their context in all of God's universe, and the relevant aspects of God's omnipotent nature. It's like
Yeah,
that's
we don't
that's
have that. We don't
what's
have
going
that picture. We don't have
on.
that
Right.
picture, right?
Right.
But we do have enough pictures, I think, to see that. Why? And it is part of the classical theistic understanding that while rational beings, humans, are wholes within a whole, non-rational beings are often really just subordinated, right, to the whole,
Mhm.
right? So like they shouldn't be like evaluated as little self-enclosed kingdoms. They shouldn't be. They
Yeah.
should be
Uh-huh.
evaluated in how they
Okay.
either obviously do or just plausibly could be contributing to this grand scheme or narrative or whatever. That's the point. Yeah.
So I got
Um,
something for you, Pat. I
yeah. Well, hold on. We weren't even done with the
What?
two more quick points.
Okay.
So the other things with robust moral realism is you have a
Kevin,
knowledge component that we have lots of moral beliefs and we're like justified and warranted. I thought you were picking up a cat for a minute. I'm like,
no,
"Pete,
no,
that'd be perfect timing."
that would have been
I'm
fantastic.
like kind of hoping one of my kittens came
High
in here.
quality podcasting if I
Um,
produced a cat for this.
So let me just briefly say that I think obviously theism provides lots of good resources. There's lots of arguments for like moral knowledge out there. So if you think that theism, there's already good arguments for theism from like moral knowledge, then I'm just going to plug them into my account. I have a specific epistemology that I like and I endorse for reflective equilibrium for moral intuitions. But so I just want to not I want to acknowledge that that's in there, and I think that the Thomistic framework holds with that as well. But back to you. Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. This is an ill-formed question. This is something being
My
thrown
favorite
at
kind.
me.
Mhm.
Um,
How do you play the Beat It solo?
I don't know.
I'm
We've
sure.
covered that one.
Yes, sir.
Many years ago. Funny enough, we did go down through the, song "Beat It." I think we did a philosophical analysis of "Beat It." It was years ago.
Oh, we
We
did
were
do that. That was
recording when
fun,
I was
yeah.
in Airbnb, and I didn't
Mhm.
realize that there was, like, some type of register right above me, and the
Mhm.
owner of the house was right above, and all he heard was my side of the conversation. I think philosophical he must have thought, "Whoever is in my basement is 100% insane."
Yeah, yeah.
Um, no, something slightly different. So, okay, so we imagine we have God, he is unbounded existence. We have us, we are bounded existence. We have an essence which defines the edges. We kind of talked about how there's that chicken or the egg problem of, well, how do we define the edges of our existence if we don't exist yet? That seems like we would need something to be in order to be and to be us, etc. But there is a question of, well, hang on. If we're
Well,
made
that is an interesting point right there. I actually hold that, we are not conceivable until we exist, and by conceivable, I mean you can make no successful reference to us before we exist. Not even God can think about us until we exist.
okay,
So
this gets really
I
interesting
yeah.
because I know that this actually has some implications for
And
like,
really, like, our existing is kinda God thinking about us, right, if you think about it, but
well,
but
it
but yeah, right, like, there's no us, as an
Uh,
abstract object,
yeah.
right?
Okay.
That
So
then exists and gets added to. I think that is if you and people start going down that road, I think that's a total mistake. Like, I'm not an abstract object, buddy, right? That
right,
has like
right.
some like paste of existence put onto it. That's
This is
wrong.
this.
There's
Okay.
just
This
no
is.
Pat Flynn before I exist, right? At all. There's nothing to refer to.
I think this is true, and it kind of answers a pretty wild question about why God would allow free creatures to do evil things in his foreknowledge. When you realize that it's actually a confusion of terms to say that, well, God was imagining all the evil things that Jake would do before Jake existed. It's
And
like,
he
well,
knew Jake would go to hell, and then he thrust him into it anyway.
right. It's
Right?
just like
Yeah.
that's a little bit philosophically confused in that, and I think actually, the big man Thomas Aquinas is behind us on this one,
hmm
where it's when I make an act of will, this is something that's chosen out of me, right? I'm the operative principle in my free will choice here. Now,
Yes.
obviously, that any type of causal power, including the power to choose, is ultimately derivative of God, right?
Yep.
However, when we say that this is my choice or not my choice for the good or against the good, this
It is
relates to
100% up to you.
my free will. However, my free will does
And
not.
it's 100% up to God.
Right, and yeah, that's the wild stuff. We'll get but, I don't exist, and thus my free will, and thus my future determinate actions, determined by my free choices, do not exist in abstraction.
That's right. They
So
exist
that mean
as they happen, right?
right,
And
but then
mhm,
that it doesn't take away from God's omniscience, because it's
mhm.
not like God is sitting around wondering. God's knowledge is a causal type of knowledge.
Right.
So it is one real thing. It's like one act. It's not a successive group of acts to say that God created me. God
Yeah.
has knowledge of the future, of which includes his created creatures, and God brought about these free will creatures. And it's not, it sounds unorthodox, and I don't know how you would express this.
Mhm.
We're not saying that God could not have known something about creatures prior, because we actually deny the about creatures part until the point where God does the actual act of putting us together with
Yeah.
an
Yeah. Good.
essence and an
Yeah.
existence.
Mhm.
So that it kind of answers the why did God create Satan if he knew he'd do something
If he
so
knew
horrible?
beforehand to say it was gonna, and the
There
answer
isn't
is he
a
didn't. Yeah, the answer is he
beforehand.
didn't. Yeah. Right.
That's the
So
problem.
right.
So I
Yeah.
mean,
So this is the optimistic account.
let's
And I think it
look
I
at it
think it and even though it
this
doesn't
way.
answer everything, I think it at least shows that these objections do not have obvious traction, right?
Uh-huh.
Because you're right. God, you say that God, knows things about the future, but he doesn't know them as future.
Right. He's
God's not
not
in time.
quite
God's eternal. He knows them
100%.
as present in his eternity.
Mhm.
So he only knows
And
really
as
that
cause.
that X person is in hell because X person is in hell,
Right.
right?
And you say, "Why is X
And
person
X
in hell?"
person is
Because of free
willing to
choice.
be in hell. Yes, and
Uh-huh.
X person. So it's not like God knew beforehand, I'm going to create X person. X person is going to go to hell. It's a bummer. Here we go
Let's
anyways.
do it.
That's
Send it.
totally wrong
Sorry, Bob. Yeah.
metaphysically. No, no, no. God is like,
Right.
this you really can't grasp it. God is so much metaphysically bigger, but in his eternity, he's like somebody who can like see everything, the entire story, every note on the sheet of music is present to him all at once from his eternity,
Mhm.
right? Okay, so there's this like foreknowledge is a bit of a misleading term. God has
Mhm.
eternal knowledge, right? So everything is present to him that God creates in his eternity, right? So if God knows somebody is in hell, it's because they are in hell and they are willing to be in hell and are culpable for it. Now, I just did a whole very long episode
Oh,
on the
nice.
justice of hell with Ethan Muse. So if anyone
Ooh.
is
I
concerned
love
about
Jason Hill.
whether
Uh-huh.
hell is just, I turn you to that episode, and we can
Cool.
talk about it a little bit more here if you want. But I think the foreknowledge objection is metaphysically confused on the optimistic end, right?
That's entirely my point here, and
Yeah.
that when God creates Satan, he creates a nature that, or I guess in essence, I'm sorry, slight distinctions there. We'll say in essence,
Yeah.
which does actually circle a little bit about what it is to be God. Just like when he creates a
Yeah, for
mushroom,
sure.
when he creates any creature, he creates them good. And to your earlier point, which comes later in the dissertation, the part I didn't read yet, is that he also created and intended the ends which relate to that type of essence, which itself is a reflection of God, and ordered those towards good ends. So it's not like God said, well, let's make an evil Satan. He said, let's make a good creature which is oriented towards the good
Right.
by its nature and in cooperation with others.
Yep.
And then he knew that it was good to have that freedom of the will.
Mhm.
And then the act of finding out Satan is bad, well, there's no
Yeah.
finding out. Again, language difficult.
Right. Yeah. God isn't like, he isn't scanning the world,
Th
right? He's
This
not
is not a
passive. Yeah.
set of actions. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll create a Satan. Gee, I wonder if he's gonna go rogue. Gee,
Don't go
it's like,
bad. Don't go
"Oh,
bad. Don't go
no, that
bad. Right.
wouldn't
Yeah.
go well."
Yeah.
This is one causal
Yeah.
action, which is choosing something which can reflect his goodness,
Yeah.
but part of a thing that can reflect his goodness is that it can reflect his ability to choose and choose freely,
Yeah.
which
Right.
entails that it has free will, which entails that it can fail.
So let's spell out. There's a lot there. So you said something, and I know you know this, but I think a lot of people are confused. It's not like God had the idea of Satan and was like, oh, it would be good
Right.
for him to have free will. Free will is this good thing. Let's add it on to Satan. No, 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 no,
Mhm.
no, no. And this is like a problem with a lot of theodicies. It's like, oh, free will is a good thing. That's why God gave it to us. No, there's no us without our
Right.
rational capacities, which
Right.
entail the ability to engage in deliberation in the space of reasons and to make judgments and to be able to fail and make defective judgments, which we are culpable for. Right? That like to not have that is to not have us. This is metaphysically part of the deal. If free will isn't something that's sprinkled on us, the question is, are we good to have? Not is free will good to have. The
Bingo,
question is,
bingo.
are we good to have?
It's like, is it good to have people? What is a person? Well, a
Yeah.
person must be rational. And then Aquinas just points out that free will drops out of rationality. So to say, okay, well, if God wanted people, then God wanted rational creatures, then God wanted creatures with free will, because that's simply downstream of what it means to be a person. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
they are
So
finite, then it's possible for them.
and the reason I think this is screwy because you hear this like a theodicies and like people like, oh, God had to give us free will or this or that because then it's good to be able to make decisions
No, there is
for
no
the good or right or wrong. Like
free
this is
will.
so silly. That is
Yeah.
so
Uh-huh.
metaphysically silly,
Right.
and I think it's an awful theodicy. It is the case though. And Maritan's really good on this. Developing Aquinas understand that it is also so like metaphysically part of the deal, part of the package that if God creates any other persons, because they are not identical to the rule itself of goodness, which God is, only God is identical to the good.
Mhm.
They all have to consider something beyond themselves when it comes to the right use of reason. And Aquinas says they can either pick up that rule and apply it in their judgments or not, right? Only
Mhm.
God is his own rule. So only God is impeccable, infallible. So if God is going to create anything else, no matter how great angel, it always has the metaphysical possibility to fail and
Right.
to fail culpably because it failed to apply either what it habitually knew or had the power to know and so on. So yeah, Aquinas is really good in saying, sin involves ignorance, but it's not the kind of ignorance that gets you off the hook.
Mhm.
It's choosing to ignore
Culpable for
what you
mistake.
did know habitually, or at least had the power to know and should have engaged that power, right? So
And that's
there's,
a failure of reason to summon the
yeah,
relevant
yeah, right. So there's
in an appropriate
right,
way.
yeah, and that's not to say that
Uh,
there isn't any type of ignorance that gets you off the hook. Of course there is, but it's not that, it's not the type of ignorance Aquinas and Aristotle is
right.
interested in is the power to ignore,
Mhm.
which if
Mhm.
anybody who has any sort of reflection on their lives know that you have used that power to make
Oh,
bad decisions.
do it all
You have
the time.
said, "Yeah, I'm not going to focus on this
Yeah.
because I know," right?
Yeah.
Like we've
Everybody
all
does.
done that. We've all done
It's
that, right?
for conscious attention on something which one knows they ought to.
Yeah. So, all right.
Um,
From there, right? There's mystery here because we said that, yeah, right. God is not. A lot of these problems come from thinking that God is just like a bigger being in the universe.
mhm.
God is the necessary condition for not our existence, but all of our operations, all of our actions. So we shouldn't think that like God causes Socrates to freely raise his hand, right? That seems weird, right? That seems like we should think in terms of like external operators. God makes it the case that Socrates freely raises his hand, right?
Mhm.
And this gives you the order of secondary causality. So the action is still totally up to Socrates. It's
Right.
Socrates' free action, but it has the sort of necessary transcendent existential condition of God's causality, right? These are the different orders of causality.
Mhm.
So if Socrates freely, did something else, like ate a cheeseburger, he just has counterfactual powers, a weird way of saying over God, that it would have just been a case that God caused Socrates to freely eat a cheeseburger instead of
Uh-huh.
raising his hand. Now, there's mystery to that, right?
Mhm.
But I argue that divine simplicity, and here, this is where the work of W. Matthews Grant is great. I try to like advance the conversation a little bit in
Yeah,
dissertation there too,
always advancing.
is that divine simplicity is really helpful here because given the sort of action theory, when God creates, when he brings about the world and even us, we avoid the conditions of determinism. Something is determined if there's some factor that is both, logically prior to and sufficient for an effect. But
Mhm.
on with divine simplicity, nothing in God changes
Right,
to him
right,
bringing something about. So there's no prior element here, right? God bringing about your free action just is your free
you're
action
free
coming
act.
about, which is obviously sufficient for it, with a causal dependence on God. So we avoid, so like again,
Yeah,
mysterious,
I think
granted, because
I
we don't have an analog of
think
divine causality. There's only one case of that. But what is clear is that it's clearly not a case of determination or necessitation or anything like that. So we can at least say, okay, this is a little bit spooky. I don't quite understand how this works. That's fine. But given how, at least a Thomistic understanding of divine causality and agency works, this sort of dual sources account, as Grant calls it, we really can say that our actions are 100% up to us on one level
Mhm.
and 100% up to God. And we can hold on to the conditions of libertarian freedom and culpability and all that. So the project there, I think, is somewhat more modest, just to show that like the objections get force from assuming a lot more than they are entitled to. And many of the things they assume are false, whether it's about God's foreknowledge or
Mhm.
God's causal relationship to the world or what have you. And we can see that the Thomistic model and divine simplicity dissolve the places where those objections get traction. And then I think at the end of the day, we're left with a good heaping of mystery.
Uh-huh.
And that
Which
doesn't
is
mean
kinda what you'd
that doesn't
expect. You
mean we
wouldn't
stop
expect any.
thinking, right? We still think
Yeah.
about. I'm still thinking about it. Like there's a lot. Like I don't know. But I at least see like that the things that were supposed to be devastating are not clearly so. Right.
Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah,
what I want to
and
say.
a mystery is not a contradiction. A mystery is something which you can continue to mine and find novel insights, even if it takes time.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, that wasn't the direction I was going to go, but
It was a good one. That was a fun one.
it was
Yeah.
a good one. I couldn't possibly resist because I think that just people get the idea of eternity is so mixed up, and the idea of what God was creating in our identity and what that entails. I just think that's a massive point that literally nobody talks about, and it's a big answer um, to kind of the whole free will problem of evil stuff. If you don't have that kind of metaphysics on the table, it's so easy to mess up. I do want to build it into the
And there is value in having a principled metaphysics that dissolves objections, even if it still leaves other questions. I would
yeah,
say. Yeah,
that's
for sure.
fine.
Right.
Yeah, if it's leaving a brute fact, I have a problem.
Okay,
If
like if
it's
I have a
leaving a
metaphysics, yeah,
contradiction,
that like
no
yeah.
problem.
For
If it's
example, if I have
leaving
a
an
metaphysics
unexplored
that clearly
place,
avoids,
it's cool.
yeah, yeah, right. So if I have a metaphysical picture in philosophical anthropology that at least avoids determinism,
Uh-huh.
awesome, right? Right.
Yep.
How the
Yeah,
mechanics of everything else works out. Right? Okay, I'll,
sure.
I'll keep working on it. But like I've got a model where it seems like libertarian agency uh, can fit here and live here fairly well. Whereas on other models of theism, and certainly most models of naturalism, I don't see that's the case.
Mhm.
So if I'm a committed libertarian, which I am, that would give me some reason to look in a certain direction.
It's over. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. If it can only, like, this is the only one that has room for it. Right.
It actually secures it, right?
Yeah.
And as you're already committed to it, you might as well get the thing undergirding your own
Mhm.
convictions. Okay, this is where I was going. Now, where was I going? Okay, so we have beings and they have an active existence, their essay, and then they have their essence and whatnot. Um, and then we say that God just is his existence. It seems like there's a few possibilities. We'll try to name them. One is it almost it looks superficially like a type of pantheism where it's like, well, wait a minute, you got God, what's he made of? Oh, he's made of existence stuff. What are we made? We're made of existence stuff.
Yep.
Okay, well, is the existence is that coming from God? Yeah, it's coming from God. Couldn't come from us. We don't exist yet. Ergo, we are part of, but he doesn't have parts, so we are of the same nature. But we aren't the same nature because it is a different essence, one who's his existence, and we're
Yeah.
clearly not eternal. So it leaves us with, well, are we just a diluted type of God, right? The other would be, well, okay, is this simply a resemblance, this exemplar formal causal space?
Yeah.
But how do we get that
Yeah. Good.
metaphysically thick enough to say that we truly have
Yeah.
existence? and not just something else. And
So
then the
I
final one, and
yeah,
before I want a Dr. Pat Flynn
but the
launch
doctor
off of this
operates on this
particular
objection. Yeah.
here is we do affirm things like, well, God's everything in God is God and God is all powerful. So is this a function of God's power to bring about things out of nothing? And we should conceive it as God's existence, yes, in infra God, but an action of God's power as it
Good.
relates to creature. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
where there's lots
I
of
pause
different
there because
things.
I want to
Yeah.
try and keep them all in mind. All right. So
Okay.
to the first one, like pantheism, God is existence, but we exist, so it's all one and same thing. No, we need to do some cleanup here. I
There
have
we
a
go.
section on
Let's
this
clean it.
in my dissertation. As you can see, I've anticipated everything.
Eh,
And what I want to say, because sometimes people would object and say that God is his existence is nonsense. It's just saying like existence exists, and it just sounds
Oh,
like
you slammed that one in the
yeah,
dissertation. I thought that was really good.
flagrantly unintelligible, but it relates to this. So what I say
Yeah.
is, there's a good article if somebody wants to look it up. I cite him, and I think this is just really just Thomas's account articulated in a kind of contemporary Christophe de Ray, and it was in religious studies, and the article is literally called "Existence Exists and It Is God." Great article, and
Good to hear.
he argues following Vallicella, and Vallicella is I think just kind of in the Thomistic kind of lineage himself a bit that when we're talking about something existing, it's shorthand. Like we really could mean like one of two things, right? We could be talking about the paradigm existent, God, existence, or as I like to say, exists with an exclamation point. I don't
Yep.
think when we talk about God, if we want to be logically clean, we shouldn't say God exists with like a subject predicate, like we're attributing existence to God. That's ontologically, that's going to make a mess of things, right? Rather, we should say like exists,
Right.
exclamation point. So I've argued in another paper that's like we should think of this as a logically simple proposition,
Mhm.
which
And the fact
has
is all of our
it's
languages.
truth evaluable, but and it has
Right.
a predicative and referential function without subpropositional components. Blah blah blah.
And language grew to deal with contingent realities.
Right. Not yeah.
So
Not the paradigm exists.
no
But the other part is when in normal everyday language when we say that something exists, we're really saying that something is caused to exist or bears a relation to the paradigm existence. Whatever that relation is, I think it's a causal relation or something like that. So it's shorthand for saying that something exists in a derivative sort of way, right?
Mhm.
So we've got exists with an exclamation point, and then we have a whole bunch of other things that are caused to exist or bear some sort of relation, sharing or participation relation. That's my favorite one, participation relation to that paradigm existent. It's not pantheism because we really are, really distinct from God, right? Like we are not parts of God that would violate divine simplicity.
Right.
And to the point about being made from nothing, this is interesting because this relates to the limit case theology. So check this out. Miller's really good on this. He says, well, think about power. The interesting thing about power is when we all sort of exercise our power, the weird thing is we always have to exercise power on something. There's always some sort of
Mhm.
potency or passivity. Like even when I raise my arm, I'm working on my arm, right? And what Miller suggests, I think this is really cool, is the limit case instance of power is the instance of power that doesn't need to work on anything at all.
Hmm.
There's no passivity, there's no potency whatsoever. It just makes it the case, right? That there's yeah, so I think it actually converges really well and helps give you like a sort of metaphysical grounding for creation out of nothing that fits with what we're looking for in a limit case instance. What's like the distinguishing feature that's varied to the point of oblivion because things get more powerful generally to think that they can do more with less, right? Well, the
Mhm.
limit case is just that which can do everything with nothing. That's
Yeah.
awesome, right? Uh, so yeah, those are some just general responses to some of the things.
Okay,
Give me
that's a
a
big one there. So when we talk about participation, I mean, this is where things get in the weeds for sure. When we talk about participation, that's another one of these, linguistic artifacts that we go, yeah, I understand what it means to participate. I participated in a bowling league. It's like I participated in this. Um, how exactly do you envision that type of participation, which, and it is tricky, means that we were A, called from nothing, and B, yet have an active existence, which is the perfection such that we can be in existence. And yet, so basically, we're out of nothing, and yet we have a resemblance to God, because of the fact that we exist. How did
I'm sorry, say it one more time again? Yeah.
Okay, so on
Sorry,
one
sorry.
hand, we're made from nothing, right? And that was done by this limit case of power. They say, what are we made?
There's no prior goo, right? Yep.
Right. No prior goo. And on the other hand, when we
I
say
mean, there's God, of course, right? But we're not,
right,
like, taken out of
we're
God,
saying
right?
we
Yeah.
weren't made out of God, right? We're not like pulled out
Yeah,
of a
right,
chunk of
yeah.
God.
God doesn't take, like, a piece of himself, like a Lego block, and throw it out there for
Bingo.
you.
So
There you
it's
go.
like well, what we were made from, well, no prior thing, which is another way to say that we were built out of nothing, right? There was no prior
Mhm.
thing because there's a limit case action of power. So at
Yep,
the
right.
point that we exist, um, how do we divide basically the existence that we then have from the existence that God has, other than the essence which limits us? Would we say that, like, how is it a participation at that point of being created instead of a like strict identity with the existence? Like, how do we draw
Well,
this? Because on the
participation
one
just
side, it's
is to
like
have
pulled
it
out of
is
God,
just to have something.
nothing.
Yeah. No, participation, in the traditional terms, Norris Clark has a good essay on this. It's just to have it in some sort of partial or limited sort of mode of
Uh-huh.
resemblance, right? It's not like we're like swimming in the thing itself,
Mhm.
right? If that's what we're thinking. So we say that it's a participation relation because whatever our essence is contains some of the purely positive perfections, right? That are in God and in the unlimited mode in a finite way. And that's the resemblance relation.
Yeah, I think yeah, I think it's generally for people almost a visualization problem, which is
Yeah.
what it often comes down to,
Hmm.
where we kind of imagine, God's all the cookie dough that goes on forever, and
Yeah.
then we're the little tree shape that cuts out a tree and then cuts out a snowman. It's like,
Yeah. Right.
not
Yeah.
quite like
Yeah.
that. It's like, no, it's actually more that when you understand God as that grounding layer, our existence is not at the level of grounding. Our existence is at an abstracted level
Mhm.
off of that. So it's not like an existence which is, um, you know, sharing in the base reality. We don't share in the base reality. That's not what we mean
Yeah. Not like in
by
like
that
a
existence.
literal cookie cutter mode
Right.
sort of way.
It's
Right. Yeah.
more like,
Yeah. Right.
if to pick probably another bad analogy, if God is a computer, to say that the software exists because of the computer is it would be true. To say that the computer causes the software to be, it's like, oh, okay, but you're not saying that it has like the same, knock on it, feel it. It has, ontological thickness in the same way that the hardware does. It's an
Yeah.
abstracted layer off of that. It's not. It's grounded in that. How would you? What
Yeah, I
analogy
would say,
would
I mean,
you
here's
put?
another analogy. I think this one is one Day Ray uses. Like, just think of like, the original Mona Lisa and I think a bunch of copies of it. And they're all like, some are drawn by like toddlers and some are, whatever, done by much more skilled, competent people, right? So you've got the paradigm, and then you have the ones that resemble it in different respects. They
Mhm.
share the perfections of it, some closer to the paradigm than others, but they're not like cut out of it,
Uh-huh.
you know what I mean? Right, so it's an analogy, it limps because it's not obviously perfect with respect to creation, because
Yeah.
there's still prime material, but that's like a better way, I think, to understand it. There's the paradigm, and
Mhm.
then there's all those things that resemble the paradigm by in an infinitely less mode, of course. Like, they're never gonna be anything close to like a copy of the Mona Lisa can get to God, which is like very, very close, right?
Right. Right.
It's always gonna fall infinitely short, but it's still going to have, the notes of those perfections that God has in the unlimited mode. And this is sort of a more so I like limit case theology, but the scotistic way is just, things have a finite mode and then the things have an unlimited mode, right? The the
Mhm.
the positive, purely positive perfections. In the finite modes, they're often distinct and scattered, but in the unlimited mode, they always have to come all one together, right? And
Mhm.
that's where the idea of like the formal distinction comes in and stuff like that. And I think that could be helpful and can be
Yeah,
made harmonious with the Thomistic understanding too. But
the
that's,
problem
yeah,
is you can carve out the space with, like, the necessary distinctions, like, obviously, God doesn't have parts, obviously this. Like, you can put that out, but to get people to grasp something more intuitively, it is hard to give an analogy because it's like I give the cookie cutter one, and it's like, "Yeah, okay, that's great for one aspect, but it can definitely mislead people."
Yeah, but why is that surprising, right? Because, an
Yeah.
analogy
Uh-huh.
is trying to, make something that is not clear more clear by using something that is clear, right? Well,
I
okay.
got one. I got
Yeah,
one.
but I
Maybe
mean,
this is
God, there's just nothing like
yeah, yeah.
God, right? Right.
You're
Right.
right,
I mean,
that
well,
is
in one sense,
nothing.
everything is like God in the sense that I'm saying, but in another sense, like there's only one God, and
Mhm.
there's only one very special active. There's like nowhere else we can look around and see an active creation, right?
Let me give you one. Let me give you one.
Okay.
It limps. Maybe not as much, I don't know.
How many
Um,
crutches does it need, right?
I've had my head in economics hard
Mhm.
recently, with stuff. I don't know, we can get into some of that stuff. The the short of it is I was helping, Fairtax create like a trained, like, LLM
Mhm.
that just answers for all of their stuff. So I've been training it on all of their data and all their research and all these econometric analyses, and then causing it to get like the hardest objections possible that it can't answer from its gigantic 340 source data set.
Yeah.
The 15 hardest objections, and I've been working through answering those and stuff. So I've had my head in economics a lot. And one analogy with that on the brain is like base money, and then you get like the M2, you get the M3, et cetera. You get these abstracted types. And you say, well, a dollar here does truly resemble something which could be a,
Yeah.
I don't know, a central bank reserve or a
Yeah.
actual hard dollar, right? But it's actually based on, and it was brought into existence from nothing in that it was an act of borrowing. Right? That's how you get more money. You get more
You know,
money
yeah,
because
I can hear the Austrian economist just screaming.
yeah. Well, hey, so, you make the bank makes a loan and then it
Yeah.
creates a deposit on the other side.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah,
well,
like, look, I think that's
like, what
like,
is the
yeah.
base? What is the actual base on which
Yeah.
everything gets well, ultimately, it'd be your narrow money, it'd be your central bank reserves, etcetera. So it's like, okay, that's a bit and what in which, like, something kinda came out of nothing, but it had to ultimately be backed and
Yeah.
grounded
Yeah.
by something which
I think
has
it's
it value in it of itself.
yeah, I think that like
It's
if you're on
wonderful.
the if you're on a bus
Yeah,
and trying to like, catechize or preach to an
an economist,
economist, maybe that's
an
about like
economist.
how useful that'll be to people who don't have that
So
background, right? Yeah, my undergrad, I was finance and econ undergrad, man, but it's been many years since I thought about that stuff. Yeah.
it's funny,
So,
you try to explain things which are more complicated by things that are less complicated. We just
right.
explained something which is very complicated by
Right.
something which is still kinda
Right. Right.
complicated.
We
So
do
I
what we
don't know
can
how
though.
helpful
Yeah,
that
we do what we
was.
can. Yeah, but I would recommend if people for the participation relation, just something like useful, accessible, just check out Norris Clark's essay. I think it's in his volume Exploration in Metaphysics. People should just get that entire volume because it's just awesome. So he's got an essay on participation in there that I found. I used it
Yeah.
in my dissertation at several points, so that was super good.
That's one that, I don't know, I'm gearing up to teach OCIA again, and the first couple classes are all philosophy.
Yeah.
So we go through all 5 of, Aquinas's arguments, we hit the De Ante, we hit all sorts of stuff. It's way overkill. I tell them basically, "Sit back, I bring some cheesecake, eat some cheesecake, we'll kinda go over this." I'm like, "I wanna make you aware of this
Yeah.
and drill into some things to show that, our faith has some pretty solid answers. Do not feel like there is a test at the end of this." So I kinda gotta get my head back into it, and a lot of it is it's like, I at the end of the day, it's like, it's gotta be communicated. I'm like, "How do we get
Well,
this, as clear?" And it's hard to kinda spell that out to somebody who it might not be complete amateur, is interested, is ready to put in a little bit of the work, but that's where always my head goes. That's why
yeah. Well, I've my mind has changed on this a little bit. I mean, like we're enthusiasts, Jake, and a lot of people
yeah,
who listen
yeah,
to our podcast, they love this stuff, and like I very much believe that there needs to be like, intellectual division of labor in the church. There needs to be people who are out there doing the metaphysics, engaging the
uh-huh,
toughest, most
uh-huh,
obscure technical objections. Um, but like I have, and this isn't my area of specialization, but I have written, a little bit more recently on Substack, you know, like with respect to like the motives of credibility, like what's going to really underwrite or at least help somebody, see the rationality of not just Christianity, but Catholicism in
Mhm.
particular. And to me, it's the signs, right? It's not like Aquinas' five way is great. I mean, I just personally, I love talking about that stuff way more than Fatima or Lourdes or Guadalupe or any, and but that is not like most people. You give them, the facts of like what went on at these
Uh-huh.
events, and it just really moves them. Of course, hardened skeptics are going to be hardened skeptics, but I think it's this, these are the sorts of things that, like, especially in combination, cumulatively, are really, really powerful, vindicatory,
Mhm,
doctrinally
mhm.
vindicatory miracles. I was talking to someone about this the other day. It's like, look, Catholicism is really, really, really special because it's got all these notes and it's got all these, like, miracles happen, I think, all over the place, but massive doctrinally vindicatory miracles that are like that carry all sorts of doctrinal content that are confirmatory. I'm looking around, and believe me, I looked. Catholicism is really, really, really unique, right? Like, you
That's
don't have
cool.
you don't have Martin Luther appearing to 100,000 people,
Right.
like blasting the Pope. It just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
That's just not there. So like if you're like, what like, and miracles at the end of the day are really, sort of meant to be signs. And
Mhm.
it's just like, to me, the beauty of the Catholic faith is, well, one, I think from an epistemological standpoint, it it's the only one that doesn't have insuperable problems because we have epistemic authority, right? We have that institutional authority, right?
Right.
And we can get into that if we want. I've got a whole article on my Substack of how to reasonably find the true church. And a lot of it comes down to the other notion of epistemic authority, and why Catholicism is really the only one that can adequately answer the call there with respect to revelation. But also, it just has all these super, super impressive vindicatory signs that are easily communicated, right? That don't require deep metaphysics. And I think that, like, religion has to be for the common person, right? Like it can't be the case that God needs us to, like, cram Deante into people's heads,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
That can't be the case, right? Like, but like, the Virgin Mary appearing to 100,000 people, on according to a timeline predicted in advance, that has all these features that just, you know that just cannot be afforded any sort of plausible naturalistic hypothesis, and like it would be seriously silly to try and attribute it to demons.
mhm.
That has serious force behind it, right? And that's just one. Like,
You
so I would say, like, if you like, so, like, give the OCI people, the quick summary of the five ways, give them the cosmological argument. But if I were like to go back to, I haven't taught, I taught confirmation several years ago.
uh
I would spend more time, and I'm not even the guy to do it. I would refer him, like we mentioned, Ethan Muse. He was on the podcast. He's been on my podcast to talk about this stuff. He's kind of the guy right now for this. I'd spend more time, like, having them look and study that, not only for their own edification, but for the purposes of evangelizing and apologetics, because those are sort of like the meta at the same time. You see what I'm saying? Like, sometimes people have, very technical, obscure objections
Uh-huh.
to Catholicism, about why transubstantiation can't be true. But it's like,
Oh, yeah.
okay, dude, right? Like, according to your interpretation of Aristotelian metaphysics, and that, like,
Uh-huh,
what the
uh-huh.
definition of an accident is, you're not going to be Catholic because of that. But Virgin Mary appears to 100,000 people, right? like,
Mhm, mm.
like, there's like a very basic principle that you should always privilege what is very, very clear over what is otherwise obscure, right?
Well,
And I think that's where these sorts of considerations are particularly helpful,
you're
right?
pleased to know I just slotted in a miracles class into this next year one. However, I found that it's not so much the apologetics of doing, like, 5 ways and a bunch of other stuff. Like the first class, I mean, we kinda have the slow get their feet into the water, then we get the God class. After that, we cover, like, the fall of man because if
Mhm.
and of the angels. Because if you don't cover that, the rest of the scripture doesn't make sense.
Yep.
However, if you don't have some amount of philosophical background, like what we were talking about earlier, you're gonna make serious mistakes and not a and then after that, we, eventually get into things like the incarnation. It's like, okay, well, if you don't get divine simplicity, then the incarnation becomes like blown apart. And then when we cover things like the Trinity later on, well, if you don't have divine simplicity and if you don't understand some of that and how we arrive at it,
Yeah.
then you can't sustain the Trinity without divine simplicity, ironically enough. um,
As I try to argue my dissertation, right?
oh, okay. Haven't got to that. But
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so it builds on that. I found myself referencing like the original class where we hit a lot of like facts about God in almost every class all the way to the end. Um, so it's like as you're probably right practically apologetically, but as far as kind of like building the system from philosophy all the way through the story of the Old Testament into the identity of Jesus, his work through the New Testament, the sacraments, it's like, oh man, it pays dividends landing some of
Yeah.
those philosophical categories up
So
front.
I agree with that. I certainly am not like saying like, keep people, ignorant savages like
Yeah.
theologically or anything like that, right? I guess what I have come to appreciate more and more is that and this is probably because of the circles we're in, Jake. I'm sure you get it a lot. It's like how often people seem to have understanding seeking faith rather than faith seeking understanding. You see what I
Mhm,
mean? And
mhm.
where their faith is like always like one objection away from being obliterated,
Yeah.
right? One highly technical,
Uh-huh,
obscure objection. It's like,
uh-huh.
this is not right.
Yeah.
This is clearly is not the appropriate methodology here. So like, like think about it again, like epistemic authorities, right? And really it is a perverse sort of paradigm where people feel like they need to be and always are the ultimate authority, whereby the church and the church's teachings always have to conform to their
Mhm.
rational adjudication. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
and this is going to sound wild, but I'm going to say that's wrong. That is
Mhm,
not how human beings operate, and that is in an impossible way to operate. We are epistemically dependent creatures that are very finite and frequently very stupid. We constantly rely on authorities all the time in everyday examples, from hiring a trail guide to a doctor. And imagine, like, how do you, when you come to hire a doctor, what you don't do is assess the entire, you know, like body of
medical
work of the
field.
doctor. You don't give the doctor a medical exam and then
Uh-huh,
see if he got every question right.
right.
You look for motives of credibility,
Uh-huh,
testimonials, education, institutional affiliation, and then you give your assent.
uh-huh.
And then you might have all sorts of questions and objections, but those motives of credibility give you reason to assent to the doctor, good reason, hopefully, and their authority such that you should defer to it unless you have
Mhm,
like really, really good overriding reasons against it. And I want to say that is the way you need to think about religion and faith instead. You don't become Catholic because you say, here's all the dogma.
uh-huh.
Let me go through it one by one, and I have to answer every objection and see that it's totally demonstrably true or whatever. Or I'm going to become Catholic unless and until, there's some objection I can't answer. That's wrong. That's wrong. You see that Catholicism is true because it has the marks of the church, because it is tested by miracles. It has the motives of credibility. And that doesn't mean you can't think about these tough problems. You can't try to, understand the answers. I think that's fruitful, but you need to do it from the right epistemic paradigm. And you
Uh-huh.
discern that the church is who she says she is, right? That she is this reliable epistemic authority because God has vindicated it, right?
Yeah, uh-huh.
Through, that's it. And that's why so that way when you come to these very tough objections, which you will, I don't care how smart you are, how clever you are, you're going to come to objections or at least things you do not understand. You can say, no big deal, right? Because I have all these other very good, clear, accessible things present to me that are clear and are accessible, that just like that's what gives me, that's what underwrites this thing. And maybe I'll solve this technical objection someday. Maybe I won't, but it shouldn't like be giving you anxiety or causing you serious doubts or
Mhm.
anything like that's really what I'm trying to get at, right?
No, it's one of my favorite things to point out in class. I'm just like, they build a lot off of that is, uh, when we get to the book of Acts, the original name for the church was the Way. And there's a reason for that. It's because it was prophesied. says God will come and he'll fill in every valley, knock down every mountain, and make a highway to God. It's like that's what the church is meant to be. It's a highway to God. Everything, so you're not going up and down hills, you're not going up hills both ways. It's just a highway. You get on the highway and then you can go to God. Just don't get off the highway. And I think that what a lot of people do is they think, well, I'll just kind of make my own highway to God. I'll just kind of cut down the trees and hike up the mountains myself. It's like, no, you do need to get on the highway. But occasionally, what we do is we find people who aren't on the highway and being pulled to God. They're
Yeah.
kind of next to the highway. And you just need to help them bushwhack their path to the highway.
Mhm.
And that's where I think apologetics is at its best. When someone says, I see the highway there, but I can't get through this obstacle to get onto
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
You're not helping them blaze their own highway. You're helping them get from the side of the road onto the road. And I had one guy say, he came into OCA the first day. And he said, Hi, this is my first time in a Catholic church in almost 30 or 40 years. I was going to get confirmed. And the day before my confirmation, when I was a kid, I met the bishop and a horrible thing had happened with his neighbor, I guess, was mentally deranged and this terrible like murder to his other neighbor.
Oh,
And he came and he asked the bishop, Hey, this horrible thing happened. Why does God permit this evil? And the bishop just flopped on the answer. And he took that as
wouldn't
the
be the first time. Yeah.
representation
Mhm.
of the church.
Mhm.
Like, give the bishop some credit. Blindsided, right?
Right. Yeah.
You should be kind of prepared for something, but he really flopped on the answer. And he said, I can't join this church if it can't contend with suffering. So he left. He ran away from his own confirmation, ran away from home, and didn't come back to the Catholic Church for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And then
Mm.
finally stepped in the door and was like, I'm willing to look at it again. So I'm like, problem of evil class. Like, cannot screw it up. Like, the dude's
Yeah.
gonna die in another 40 years. We can't flub it. And it's like, that's one where he saw where he wanted to be. He wanted to be on the road to faith, but there was a freaking like log in his way that, we had to help him out with. And he felt like the bishop went, I don't know how to get over the log. And he's like, I guess I'm bushwhacking.
Yeah. So I mean, there's like two ways that you can go about this, right? One is you can like try to like chop up the log, right?
Uh-huh.
Dissolve the problem of evil. And like, look, I think that's commendable. We've had many conversations on that. I've got my book, The Best Argument for God. I try to, give a theodicy there. I've got two other published articles on the problem of evil. So I'm very interested in showing that you can meet that challenge.
Mhm.
However, I think it's also very useful to show that you can just leave the log there and you can step around it.
Count. Yeah, yeah.
And that's reasonable to do so, right?
Look, some
Because
people
the problem of evil, whether it's illogical or evidential or whatever, is technical, it's abstract, it's controversial, it's not clear.
Mhm,
Certainly it's not clear, right?
mhm,
But the stuff that I think evidences the Catholic faith, especially the miraculous accounts, is clear.
mhm.
It is clear. So it's okay to say, I'm just gonna go, I'm gonna take what is clear and use that to navigate over what is unclear. And maybe I'll get some light on that unclear stuff at some point, but I can just step around the law, right? Like
Yeah,
that can be there. I don't have to have a definite answer to why God allows negative states of affairs generally or specific. I don't think you'll ever get answer to the particulars, right? I think you can get
right. That's
general answers,
impossible.
right? It's impossible. And it's not to downplay, it's not to say it's not important or it's not insignificant, but it is to show that it does not and should not be something that is preventing you from entering the church.
No, that's right.
Living
I
with
mean, I
this, right?
think
Yeah.
what we ended up doing was we we sat there together and we swung the axe and we chopped out enough that he felt like I could straddle this tree and get over.
Yeah. And even like you
It
said, sometimes you just remove part of the log. That's sometimes
and
enough for
that's
people,
where he
right?
felt
Yeah.
like we're making progress. Like, this is like, we can, like, maybe I can't do it, or maybe he can do it, or maybe he won't understand everything, but he felt like this can just one can get through. It wasn't like this contradicts the very truth claims about God and his goodness, because
Yeah.
then it's just like, where am I even going?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I got to look more into miracles too. I have I don't know. Maybe have more skeptical streak on some of those things.
Well, you won't after you look into them, man. They're really
What's your
impressive.
top one? Is Fatima the number one?
Fatima is so big. Here,
Okay.
Matt Fradd just did an amazing podcast with Ethan, and it's like 5 hours long,
Uh-huh.
and it's so
Oh,
impressive. And look, the Fatima thing's interesting, and it's for me because I became Catholic not because of those miracles, but my own sort of personal. I had personal, like I think legitimately personal miracles, but none that
mhm.
I would expect to convince anyone else. But like very
Yeah.
providentially tailored to me, sorts of things. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep.
And then all the philosophy, right? So I'm becoming Catholic. I'm leaving mass one day, and they've got like pamphlets on Fatima out there, and I was like sort of offended by it because I'm like,
Huh.
I just found this rational religion, and they're still
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
this like superstitious stuff for the grandmothers. Like this is a pamphlet, like a grand.
For the grandmother. Yeah.
So I picked it up and it's like oh, this is just gonna be some like silly thing. And I looked into it. I'm like, okay, at least I can't like just like immediately dismiss this out of hand, right? There's
Mhm.
something
Okay.
here. And then of course I went down the rabbit hole and completely convinced by it. I
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
like blown away by how powerful and obvious the case is, right? Because it's not just any one thing. It's the confluence of all the different coincidences, not just a massive miracle, but the predictions in advance and everything else. So I would say, yeah, look there first. I would encourage everyone to look there with an open and honest, mind. And
You
I
know,
think, yeah, yep,
I'm closer to you on that than I'm kind of thinking back to my story. No, so I'm a Bible guy. Like the reason I'm in the church is the Bible. Like
yep,
principally, that's the reason I think still study the Bible very deeply. There's the
a good
thing about
habit.
being a Protestant was that the Bible was drilled into me from a young age. I know a heck of a lot of Bible. Like that's kind of the core piece of
Yeah,
okay, you can vindicate that these are indeed things which are written by the apostles, the prophets, etc., venerated as such from okay, cool. Bang, I see the Catholic Church and all the distinctive doctrines. That was the big thing. However, in the Bible, I saw that the church operated from the beginning with miracles, with prophecies, with all of this stuff. So when I started to investigate initially what church should I be a part of, that was one of my filters. That I don't
yeah,
know everything about the early church, but I do know that this was like a core standing piece of the operation of the church
yeah.
established.
Hmm.
And really that leaves you with, oddly enough, charismatics and Catholics. Like there's the Pentecostals, charismatic, all these people. And then the big Protestant group in the middle is really like, no, we deny it. And when
Yeah,
you look historically, and this was the part that blew my mind, when you look historically about why Protestants deny that, there's miraculous stuff and whatnot still operating outside of the apostolic age, it's like quite obviously they said every other point that God basically had this giant event whereby we had to say no to one authority and yes to another, it's vindicated by public miracles to vindicate the authority. And they actually initially expected God to vindicate the opposition to the Catholic Church with public miracles. And it didn't happen. So they're like, "Well, what the hell?" Like, I thought we were clearly on the right side,
mhm.
and they said, "Look, the saints had miracles, so we can probably expect that God will give us some as we're in this saintly form trying to purify his church."
Yeah.
Didn't happen. So instead of them saying, "Maybe God is not vindicating this," they said, "Maybe those miracles by the
Start
saints
attacking the miracles. Yeah,
were
right.
not." So it was
Yeah,
actually a response to an expected thing they were hoping to get in the breaking off of the church. And
yeah.
it wasn't until generations had passed after that initial kind of crisis
Hmm.
that some Christians started looking back at their Bibles and saying, "Oh, look, Christians had miracles and healings and this and that." And then they tried to resurrect that in large part in the US, in large
Hmm.
part kind of Great Awakening type period. However, if you go to those churches, maybe God's operative here and there. God likes people. God's nice to people. But
Yeah.
in general, it seems off base. And when you look at the action inside of the Catholic Church, it seems a heck of a lot more legitimate. And
Oh,
it-
yeah, it's I mean, look, I don't wanna I don't know, I just will say it in a way that reflects how confident I actually am. It's not even close, right?
yeah.
Like, yeah,
Mhm.
general miracles happen all over the place, healings and all that.
But there's no
But miracles that have
Presbyterian Fatima.
doctrinally confirmatory content about Marian dogma, the papacy, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, you only find those ever really going in one direction, ever, right?
Yeah,
On a
yeah.
massive vindicatory, in a massive vindicatory way. And I want to say, even the Bible stuff, like, I'm not coming from a Protestant background. I came from a naturalistic background. It's just like, yeah, like, why assume the Protestant paradigm to begin with, right? Like,
Mhm.
biblical
Oh, that's a big
exegesis
one.
is
Yeah.
is really difficult. Yeah, I think that there's like very strong Catholic arguments from Scripture. I guess at the end of the day, I think they're stronger than a lot of Protestant ones. But I'll admit, like, there's very clever, Protestant arguments from Scripture too. Uh, okay. Uh, are you like? Do people have to be like PhD level like Bible scholars to
Mhm,
be able to find the
mhm.
true church? That just seems ridiculous.
Right.
Or maybe they could just look to huge miracles, right? Right? Like, it's not crazy to think that like God is going to like, not make finding the true church like essentially impossible, right? And I think
Well,
like the way people approach it, like, I think it's good. Again, intellectual division of labor. It's good
mhm,
that Catholics have the biblical case, the historical case, and
mhm.
this or that. But it is also, I think, bizarre, if not insane, to think that like this is the method through which people should be finding what the true religion is.
I
I
would
think
push back a
Mhm.
little bit on the
push
miracles playing that much of a case. I would say when you look at what Jesus says is, "Hey, I'm planting this. It's like a mustard seed. It'll grow to be the biggest of all the trees in the garden. The birds are gonna nest in it."
Yep.
What he's saying is it starts with me, it continues in a steady course of growth, it branches out to be the largest. It's like this is the
Yeah.
obvious it's the biggest one in the garden. So I think when we ask,
Well, no,
well,
no.
which
So I
one is
agree with that
the
because that's part of the notes of the church, right?
like,
So it's just, to me, it's not just
I
miracles, but
you
it's
know,
also
it's
like
that
Catholic Church is
plays
really
along.
big, Catholic Church is really old. We're
Yeah,
literally on the
you know
grave of Saint Peter, right? Right. All these like
yeah,
silly,
that's
simple
where
but powerful points of convergence of like, and you always have to ask it comparatively, right? Like,
mhm,
if if this is the true religion, what would I expect?
mhm.
Versus if it's not, what would I expect?
Oh, yeah.
And I think
Amazing the core on a lot of
once you do it like
it.
that, man, I think so. I want to say, yeah, everything you're saying, I agree with too.
Yeah,
I just
I
think
would
miracles are just another big,
I gotta look
huge
into
part of
miracles.
that. Yeah.
I underrate miracles. I do.
Mhm.
I should probably look into those more. I'm gonna throw a miracles class in there so I can do a deep dive and look at some of the top ones. But yeah, for me, it was always the
Yeah, Eucharistic
eliminate
miracles. Don't forget the Eucharistic miracles too.
okay, I have looked into some of those, and there's a lot of them. And I've had trouble verifying key parts of the claim. Like a lab report says X, Y, and Z. I'm like, can I find the lab? Can I find the authentic lab report? I mean,
So I would recommend again, for the kind of most recent, because these have been, um,
uh-huh.
yeah, I guess of there's been a lot of, I'm on Substack, so there's a lot of Substack miracle
Yeah,
discourse right
okay.
now. Yeah, see Laciano, see Ethan on Frad and
Heard
some
of
of the some of that.
Lachiana.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would start there for anyone who's interested. And
Gotta dig. If you could think of, yeah, I gotta hit one that's the strongest possible. I mean, it's like my wife is, a scientist, and I studied science before I studied philosophy and a lot of other things. So there is, I don't know, a little inner scientist who's just like, I need to read the lab report myself, like very carefully trace every kind of source because I think it's important. And I know that, like, from a Protestant background, it's like, I was always taught you can defend God from a very, like, 7-day creationist thing. Like, when I was
Mhm.
in elementary school, I went to an elementary school that was through Bob Jones University, and they're, like, super, super, creationist, and there was lots of scientific claims that later on,
Yeah.
high school going into college, I'm like, "It's not how radiometric dating works." I'm
Mhm,
like,
mhm.
mm-mm." And
Yeah.
so
So
whenever I hear those scientific claims, I'm like, Okay, I know exactly what it's like to kind of build, a faith structure on top of
and then have a bunch of egg on your
then
face, right?
boom.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm like,
So
"Ooh, if I'm gonna do
absolutely,
that, I'm
yeah,
gonna be
absolutely don't encourage that. Yeah.
incredibly
Mhm.
careful."
So then you would be an interesting case then. So what I will challenge you to go forward with your investigation, and I know you like doing this on your podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So,
That would be a fun
pick
series.
2 or 3 of those, a skeptical Jake,
Mhm,
and,
mhm.
see where you land, man, and,
And,
I would be very curious
you
on that.
know,
I know you're a
occasionally people on my
thorough thinker,
podcast get a little annoyed with me because, um, I
but I think
try
your
not to
attitude is right because clearly most miracle claims are false, right? Like,
I think I'm
across the board.
open to them, but it's like there's certain arguments that I hear, like I've always been kind of anti-moral argument. It's kind of having a little bit of a day in the sun. I hear it all over the place.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Oh, is it? Man, I
"Hmm,
just hear everyone hate on the moral argument
really?
space.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Well, I guess I'm a hater."
it's like the cool thing to do, right now is like, poo-poo on the moral argument.
Yeah, and I don't really I don't take it for the same reasons as everybody else does. I kind of sketched it out earlier. I think
Yeah.
that from a 32,000-foot view, we should say that the universe ought to bring about moral beings because a moral God brought about the universe. Ergo, we should see it targeting morality. And if we then accept, say, evolution, then we ought to see evolution target morality providentially. Okay, well, that undermines the idea that evolution would not bring it about, and yet it's here, and therefore God, which seems to be pointing to some type of miraculous intervention, which seems contrary to the intended purpose of the universe, which is to display the character of God, which to me would be best displayed by bringing rational creatures towards a moral end in some way, right? Or at least to moral sensibilities. So, yeah, it's like some of those arguments, I'm like, I don't know about that. The Kalam argument. I mean, I kind of I've softened on that one initially. I wasn't a huge fan of some of it, some of the regress type stuff, and
Well,
then
yeah, I'm with you. Like, I think most formulations of the moral argument are fairly crude and not particularly forceful. The Kalam,
mhm.
yeah, it's one I peek into every now and then. I think my mind is still relatively open on that.
Yeah, fine with just to show that anything that comes into being is therefore not a necessary being. Cool, let's run a contingency argument.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'd
yeah.
rather not run it
Clearly.
like a Craig does, where you see the way he uses his language, he doesn't say an all-powerful God, because it doesn't necessarily prove the creation of a finite universe doesn't prove an all-powerful being.
Right. He has a
Yeah,
sort of
sure.
cumulative case that he likes to
Right.
make, right? Yeah.
And it's like, that's fine, that's all well and good, I don't have an issue with it, I really don't have an issue with his formulation. I
Yeah.
just don't think it's a knockdown, drag out punch, like if we use it to secure a key premise in the contingency argument.
Yeah, well,
I
that
think
gets
it's a
to
knockdown,
yeah,
drag out.
man, we're kind of veering all over the highway right now, but
Aren't
that's
we
I
all?
guess that's all right. It's your podcast. We can do what we do what we please.
Chaos.
Just real quick, and then I actually have a gig I got to do in a couple
Cool, I
hours.
got some
But yeah,
people arriving soon.
but yeah, so I mean, I like the kind of traditional, especially Thomistic arguments for God because it's pros and cons, right? I mean,
Mhm.
the pro is I think you get a much richer conception of God, you get a much more robust form of
Yeah.
argumentation. The con is you
Uh-huh.
kind of got to do all that metaphysics up front, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, but that's the fun stuff, Pat.
But yeah, so I enjoy that, and I think it's more
Mhm.
fruitful in the end. And I also remind people that like you're not going to get away from metaphysics. Ultimately, you're going to have to do it at some point,
Uh-huh.
and it's better to just get it
Right
right at the
hand thing.
start, right?
Right up.
Right, because it's like, even if you take, like, these more modest approaches that don't have all these, controversial metaphysical commitments up front, you run all over God, people are gonna have all sorts of objections that are metaphysically relevant, right? And you're
Okay.
gonna have to deal with it at some point anyways, and you're just
100%.
yeah, so that's my little spiel on all that, and
I
that's
think
why yeah,
I wouldn't expect us to take a miracles route, but maybe I'll look into the Eucharistic miracles.
do it, man, yeah,
That'd be
I'll leave you with that challenge, check
if you
out some
know a
of
top
the
like the top 1 or maybe the top 2.
Well,
Mm,
if
mhm.
yeah, I'm gonna commend Ethan again because he's got on his Substack seriously impressive articles on
Okay.
Lanciano,
E
Fatima. You'll find all the relevant sources that you want. Ethan Muse, give him a shout out. Um,
Muse?
Muse. He was on Frad recently in my show too. Yeah, really. He's relatively recent, but just very impressive guy.
Mm.
What's the other one? I said Pio, Fatima, Laciano. Yeah, so those 3. So start there, dive in, be curious where you land. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. It's one of those things I'd love to be like, "This is absolutely locked up." Um, we'll see. I don't know. Well, cool. Pat, It's been fun as always. I'll
Always
probably
a joy, my brother. Always fun. I like just coming on here and jamming with you, dude. Always. Yeah.
yeah, I'll try to finish up some dissertation and, yeah, I am finishing up book 3 of Thumper's Bad Day with the Problem of Evil, so any type of brilliant ideas, I would love to work in what we were talking about, like but how the heck do you do that with God loving people and loving them into existence, which implies that they are people, thus they're rational, thus they have a will, but the will doesn't exist before it exists. Ergo, when it comes into existence and it's finite, it can fail. So we kind of like get that and kind of
Into a
get
kid's
around
book.
some
Into a kid's book. Yeah,
into
yeah.
the kids'
We'll
book.
figure
We
that. Yeah.
got
So for,
there.
so for my I'm probably going to share this on my podcast. For my audience, Jake is trying to take some very obscure metaphysical arguments, some of which is featured in my dissertation, and put it into a very charming kids book. He's off to a great start. So we'll work on it, man. And once that launches, you better believe we're gonna have you on to
Oh, that
talk
would be
on it.
really man.
We'll
I want
launch
to
a
write
whole
the
line.
rest
Yeah.
of them. I got 2 more to come.
Yep.
Thumper's Inferno and The Necessary Beetle.
First Inferno.
Thumper's Inferno. Yeah, man. The Necessary Beetle I'm most excited about. I'll see if you have some
Awesome.
good ideas. Some weasels are coming to sell some pets, but you don't have to feed them. You don't have to water them. You don't have to do anything.
Mm.
They just are necessary beetles. You can have a little pet beetle. It's
How
amazing.
convenient.
Doesn't
How
depend on
convenient.
anything.
Awesome.
And they just are.
Hmm.
But they're going to be out of town and you already paid the money and then your beetle might pass out of being. Yeah. So then we find out that this was a hoax. How do we determine if something is a necessary beetle or a contingent beetle? And it turns out that no beetle can be necessary.
Mm.
Only God can be necessary.
Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Boom. And everything else is just a hoax. And if they're trying to
Mhm.
pitch you a universe which is necessary and contingent, they're just a weasel.
Yeah.
Won't that be great? Kids
Be
will love
great,
it.
man.
Kids will
Yeah.
love it. Fun as always. I think people are going to be in my driveway in a minute,
Awesome,
bothering me.
brother.
Things other than metaphysics, which is always a bother. But cool. We'll chat later, I'm sure. Listeners, forgot you were here through most of this, and you're probably gone by now. But thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone. Peace.